Hey there, story lovers. This is Fiction Moon, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Harry was a primordial Shadow King reborn at Privet Drive and his dark aura made Dumbledore collapse at age 6? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Dark Between Stars. The shadows in Harry Potter's cupboard didn't behave the way shadows should. Most people never noticed. Most people didn't look closely enough at a cupboard under the stairs to notice anything at all. But if you pressed your eye to the gap beneath the door on any given night, you would have seen something that the rational part of your brain would immediately try to explain away. The shadows pooled differently in there. They collected in corners that shouldn't have had corners. They moved without any corresponding movement of light, shifting slowly, the way deep ocean water shifts when something enormous passes beneath the surface. Harry noticed. Harry had always noticed. He was 6 years old, small for his age, with messy black hair that defeated every comb Aunt Petunia had ever wielded against it and eyes that were, depending on who was looking, and how much attention they were paying, either a perfectly ordinary green or something else entirely. Something that sat behind the green like a second color waiting for permission to show itself. He lay on his cot in the cupboard with his knees pulled to his chest, listening to the Dursleys settle into their nighttime rituals above him. Dudley's heavy footsteps crossed the ceiling. The television murmured in the sitting room. Uncle Vernon's armchair gave its familiar exhausted groan. Harry tracked all of it with the automatic precision of a child who had learned very early that the sounds of a house told you everything you needed to know about whether you were safe. He was thinking about the thing that had happened at school that day. Marcus Webb, a fourth year who thought it was tremendous fun to knock things out of smaller children's hands, had shoved Harry's lunch tray into his chest in the canteen. The beans had gone everywhere. Harry had looked up at Marcus, and Marcus had looked back at him, and then Marcus had gone very white and very quiet and walked away without saying anything at all. He'd been that way for the rest of the day, sitting at his desk in the corner of whatever classroom he had, staring at nothing. Harry hadn't done anything. That was what troubled him, lying here in the dark with the shadows breathing slow around him. He'd simply looked at Marcus. He'd felt something move behind his eyes, not anger, exactly. More like attention. The way a deep thing might turn its gaze upward toward a ripple on the surface of still water. And Marcus had walked away like a man who had suddenly remembered something terrifying. This kept happening. Harry turned onto his back and stared at the underside of the stairs above him, where the wood was dark with age and someone had, years ago, scratched a child's drawing of a sun into one of the boards. He'd always assumed it was him, though he had no memory of doing it. His fingers found the edge of his cot in the dark, and the shadows shifted toward his hand like water toward a drain. "Stop," he said quietly. They stopped. He'd learned, at around age 4, that the shadows listened to him. Not in a frightening way, it had frightened him once, but he'd grown past that the way you grow past being afraid of thunder when you realize the thunder can't actually touch you. The shadows listened the way a very old, very patient thing might listen. They weren't malicious. They were just there, present in the way that a deep lake is present, and they were connected to something in Harry that he didn't have a word for yet. He closed his eyes. Sleep came easily, the way it does for people who are not afraid of the dark. The morning came in grey and damp, which was appropriate for mid-October in Surrey. Harry was up before the Dursleys. He was always up before the Dursleys, and had already started the kettle and laid out Vernon's newspaper when Petunia came downstairs in her dressing gown, stopped in the kitchen doorway, and gave him the look she always gave him. The one that wasn't quite revulsion and wasn't quite fear and had never settled into anything simple enough to name. "Don't burn the eggs," she said. "I won't," Harry said. He hadn't burned the eggs in 8 months. She swept past him and made herself tea, and Harry cracked eggs into the pan with the careful economy of someone who'd been doing it since he was tall enough to reach the hob. Dudley came down next, pink and rumpled, and dropped into his chair hard enough to make the table shudder. He looked at Harry with the automatic hostility of a boy who'd been told all his life that this other, smaller boy was a problem, and therefore regarded him as one on principle. Harry looked back. Just looked. Dudley found something very interesting about his plate. Vernon arrived last, already in his shirt and trousers for work, and took his seat without acknowledging Harry at all, which was the version of their relationship Harry genuinely preferred. Vernon Dursley was a man composed almost entirely of suppressed anxiety and bluster, and Harry had noticed, over the years, that the anxiety was getting worse. Not because of anything Harry had done. Simply because of what Harry was, something that Vernon couldn't name and therefore couldn't dominate, and that drove him to a low, constant, simmering fury. Harry set the plate in front of Vernon and stepped back. Vernon picked up his fork. Then he stopped. Harry had already turned back toward the hob. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't even thinking about Vernon. He was thinking about the drawing on the underside of the stairs, and whether the person who made it had been happy. "Boy," Vernon said. "Yes." "What are you doing?" Harry turned. "Making breakfast." "I mean," Vernon stopped. The vein in his temple was doing its thing. His face had gone from pink to a deeper, mottled red. He pointed at the wall, specifically at the shadow that fell across the kitchen wall from the window frame, which was, Harry noticed when he looked, moving slightly, curling at its edges in a way that had nothing to do with the cloud cover outside. "What is that?" Harry looked at the shadow. It stilled immediately. "I don't know what you mean," Harry said. This was not technically a lie. He didn't fully know. He just knew it was connected to him, which wasn't the same thing. Vernon stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he stabbed his egg with perhaps more force than necessary and said nothing else for the rest of breakfast. School was fine. School was almost always fine, in the specific sense that Harry was left alone there in a way he wasn't at home, and being left alone was a condition Harry had come to deeply appreciate. He sat in the back of Miss Fellow's class and did his work quickly and quietly, and when it was done he did it again, slower, so that the gap between him and his classmates didn't become so obvious that someone said something about it. He'd learned that from watching the world. You could be exceptional as long as you were quiet about it. The moment you stopped being quiet, people started asking questions, and questions led to attention, and attention led to the specific kind of discomfort that Vernon summarized every few months as, "There's something wrong with you, boy, and I won't have it in my house." Not that Harry was particularly afraid of Vernon's displeasure. He just found the whole production exhausting. He was on his way back from the water fountain after lunch. The canteen was off limits after the Marcus incident, on the theory that giving Marcus space to recover was simpler than whatever the alternative would be, when he felt something. A prickle at the back of his neck, between his shoulder blades. The same sensation he got in the cupboard sometimes, when the shadows moved without him meaning them to. He stopped walking. There was a man standing at the end of the corridor. Just standing there, looking at Harry, in the particular way that suggested he had been looking at Harry for some time and had not expected Harry to stop. He was old, genuinely old, not just Vernon's sort of old, which was the old of a man who'd stopped caring about himself sometime in his 40s. This man was old the way certain trees are old, with something about his stillness that suggested he had watched many, many things happen and had outlasted most of them. He had a long white beard, half-moon spectacles, and robes that were, Harry processed this slowly, not any color that Harry had a name for. Somewhere between blue and something else. He was looking at Harry with an expression Harry had never seen on a grown-up before. Something between fascination and caution. Harry looked back at him. "Hello," he said. "Hello, Harry," the man said. His voice was warm, deep, the kind of voice that probably made most people feel immediately reassured. "My name is Albus. I wonder if I might speak with you. Are you from the school?" Harry asked, though he already knew the answer was no. "No," Albus said, and smiled gently. "I'm from somewhere else entirely." Harry considered him for a moment. There was something about the man that wasn't quite ordinary, a quality that sat around him the way heat sits around a fire, not burning, but present, the sense that something significant was happening in his vicinity. Harry recognized that quality because he had it himself, though the versions were nothing alike. This man's was warm and golden. Harry's was, well. He'd seen his own shadow once, on a very sunny day, and it had been darker than it should have been. Much darker. Like looking through a window into a room with no light at all. "All right," Harry said. "But not here." The man nodded, once, with what appeared to be genuine respect. "After your school day, then." Harry went back to class. They met on the street outside the school at 3:30, the old man leaning on a walking stick he hadn't had before, or perhaps he had and Harry hadn't noticed, and Harry carrying his nearly empty backpack and wearing Dudley's old jacket, which was 3 sizes too large and gave him the silhouette of a very small child wearing a tent. They walked, because Harry had suggested it, on the theory that walking conversations were easier to leave than sitting ones. "You watch people carefully," the old man, Albus, said, after they'd gone half a block in silence. "You've been watching me for longer than today," Harry said. "Not an accusation. Just a fact." Albus's step hitched fractionally. "Yes. I have. Since I was a baby." A pause. "Yes. Why?" Albus was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was deciding how honest to be, which Harry had learned to read in adults the way other children learn to read facial expressions. "Because something happened when you were very young," he said at last. "Something that I was responsible for, in a way. And I've wanted to make sure that you were all right." "I'm all right," Harry said. "Yes," Albus said, and there was something complicated in his voice. "You rather appear to be." They walked past a row of houses with identical gardens, and Harry let the silence stretch, because he'd found that silence was usually more productive than more questions. People filled silence with what they actually meant, given enough time. "There are things," Albus said eventually, "that I should explain to you. About where you come from. About what happened the night your parents died. About what he paused. About the world you belong to." "Magic," Harry said. Albus stopped walking. Harry kept walking 3 more steps before stopping himself and turning back. The old man was looking at him with that expression again. The fascination and caution one. "You know." "I suspected," Harry said. "I've read what I can find. None of it quite fits, but the category fits." "The category," Albus repeated, as if he were tasting the phrase. "Whatever I am," Harry said, with perfect calm, "it's in the same family as what you are. The difference is scale." The silence that followed lasted approximately 8 seconds, which felt, to Harry, much longer. "I think," Albus said carefully, "that I should come and see you at home." Harry thought about this. About what home meant, the cupboard, the shadows, the drawing of a sun on the underside of the stairs. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow evening." He turned and walked the rest of the way to Privet Drive, and didn't look back, and the shadows fell from every fence and garden wall to pool gently around his feet, and the street was very quiet in his wake. Number 4, Privet Drive had never been a remarkable house. This was, in fact, its primary virtue. In Vernon Dursley's view, it was precisely as unremarkable as all the other houses on the street, which confirmed that the Dursleys were as normal as all the other families on the street, which was the cornerstone of Vernon's entire self-concept. Albus Dumbledore arrived at precisely 6 in the evening the following day, Tuesday, which meant Vernon was home from work and watching the evening news, and Petunia was doing something with vegetables in the kitchen, and Dudley was upstairs engaged in what sounded like the systematic destruction of one of his toys. Dumbledore knocked at the front door with 3 precise raps, and Harry, who had been sitting in the cupboard reading, he'd found an old encyclopedia at the school jumble sale, and had read it cover to cover twice, felt him arrive before the knock came. Something in the air changed when Dumbledore got within a certain distance. It was like the pressure drop before a storm. Harry came out of the cupboard and opened the front door himself, before Vernon could lumber out of the sitting room. Dumbledore stood on the doorstep in robes that were a deep, slightly improbable blue, the half-moon spectacles bright in the early evening light. He looked at Harry with that same expression. Harry was beginning to catalogue it, to understand its components, there was the fascination that was intellectual, and the caution that was instinctive, and beneath both of those, something that might have been fondness, though it was the kind of fondness held at arm's length, kept there deliberately. "Harry," he said. "Hello," Harry said. "Come in." He stood aside. Dumbledore stepped over the threshold. Later, in all the years that came after, Harry would remember this moment as occurring in slow motion, though he knew from the outside it must have happened in a second or less. Dumbledore stepped into the hallway, and the house changed. The air changed. The shadows that lived in the corners of number 4, that always pooled deeper and stranger than they should have, that had given the Dursleys a low-grade unease for 6 years without any of them being able to articulate why, those shadows turned. Like sleeping things becoming aware. Like the surface of deep water registering the pressure of something far below. They turned toward Dumbledore. And Dumbledore, the greatest wizard alive, the man who had defeated Grindelwald, the man whose name caused powerful people to straighten their spines, Dumbledore made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a word, and his hand came out to grip the door frame, and then his hand slipped, and he went down. Not violently. Not like a man who'd been struck. Like a man whose legs had simply decided, reasonably and without malice, that they had done quite enough for today. He went down slowly, one hand still raised toward the door frame, the other curling into the carpet of the hallway, and then he was sitting on the floor looking up at Harry with an expression that Harry had never seen on an adult's face before and would not forget. Pure, uncomplicated awe. There were footsteps from the sitting room, Vernon, roused by the sound. He appeared in the sitting room doorway in his undershirt and saw a strange old man sitting on his hallway floor looking up at his nephew, and his face went through 3 colors in rapid succession. "What in the—" "It's all right," Harry said, without looking at Vernon. He crouched down in front of Dumbledore so they were at eye level, or close enough. "Are you all right?" Dumbledore breathed out slowly. His eyes, very blue, very bright, were fixed on Harry's face, and Harry held his gaze and didn't look away, because looking away felt somehow wrong. Like turning your back on something that deserved to be faced properly. "I am," Dumbledore said, after a moment, quite humbled. "Can you stand?" "In a moment." He pressed one hand to the floor, and Harry noticed that his hand was trembling. Not much, a fine tremor, the kind that a proud man might hope no one noticed. Harry noticed, and said nothing about it. "I confess," Dumbledore said, his voice remarkably steady for a man who had just collapsed in a hallway, "that I was not prepared for this." "I know," Harry said. "I could feel you coming down the street. I should have warned you, maybe. I didn't know it would be that strong. It is remarkably." Dumbledore paused, searching, which itself was remarkable. This was clearly a man who found words easily, and the difficulty of finding them now said something. "Concentrated," he finished. "Being near you is like standing at the edge of something very deep." "Yes," Harry said. That felt accurate. Vernon made a strangled noise from the sitting room doorway. "Petunia," he bellowed. "Petunia, get in here." Harry stood up and looked at Vernon. "He's a guest," he said, and something in his voice made Vernon go quiet, in the same way Marcus Webb had gone quiet, in the same way certain things went quiet when a much larger thing turned its attention their way. "He's going to sit down in the kitchen and have some tea, and you're going to be polite." Vernon stared at him. For 6 years, Harry had been quietly compliant in the specific way that a person is compliant when they've judged that compliance is the easiest path. This was different. This wasn't compliance at all. This was a child of 6 telling a man of 43 what was going to happen in his own house, and meaning it completely, and the monstrous thing was that Vernon found, when he looked into those green eyes, that he had absolutely nothing to say. Petunia appeared from the kitchen. She saw the old man on the floor, and her face went pale in the specific way that suggested she knew, had always known, had spent 6 years not quite successfully pretending she didn't know, that something like this was eventually going to happen. "Tea," Harry said to her, the same way he said it every morning. Then he turned back to Dumbledore and offered his hand. Dumbledore took it. His grip was firm, and Harry felt the warmth of him, that golden, accumulated power, and felt, too, the way it rippled uncertainly in the presence of what Harry carried. Like a candle near something immense. He helped the old man to his feet, and they went to the kitchen. Petunia made tea and then left the kitchen with the speed and relief of a woman who has managed to avoid an explosion she wasn't sure she deserved, and Vernon made one attempt to stand in the kitchen doorway and be present, which Harry ended with a look, and then it was just the two of them at the kitchen table. Dumbledore wrapped his hands around his cup and seemed to be taking stock of himself, the way experienced men do after something has fundamentally surprised them. Harry watched him do it and waited, eating a biscuit, because he'd missed most of dinner in the cupboard and he was hungry. "Your eyes," Dumbledore said. "What about them?" "They're green. But when you helped me up," he paused. "They went dark. Not dark like a color. Dark like an absence." "Did they?" Harry said, with genuine curiosity. "I can't exactly see my own eyes." "Do you know what you are?" Harry considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. He broke his biscuit in half and looked at it. "I know what I'm not," he said. "I'm not just the boy who lived. That's a story people have told themselves, and it's not false exactly, but it's small. Like describing the ocean as wet." Dumbledore was very still. "I know things," Harry continued, and it was difficult to describe, even to himself, how this knowledge existed, not in his head like facts learned in school, but in his bones, in the darkness behind his eyes, in the shadows that came to his hand like water. "Things I shouldn't know. Not about magic or school or the world, those things I've had to read about, work out from what I can find. But other things. Older things." He looked up at Dumbledore. "When did magic start?" "The precise origin of magic is, before that," Harry said, quietly. Dumbledore fell silent. "There was something before," Harry said. "Before whatever people call the beginning. Not a person, not a god in the way stories describe gods. More like, a condition. The way darkness is a condition. Not the absence of light, but something in its own right. Something that was." He stopped, because words were inadequate, and he'd known they would be. "I'm not that thing. But I'm made of it. Whatever that means." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car went past on Privet Drive, headlights sweeping briefly across the window. The refrigerator hummed. Ordinary sounds, ordinary house, and Albus Dumbledore sitting across from a 6-year-old boy with ancient shadows pooling softly around his feet. "I placed you here," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice had shifted to something that was not quite guilt but in the same neighborhood. "When you were 15 months old. I made the decision, and I have believed, until quite recently, that it was the right one. That you needed to be hidden. Protected. From Voldemort," Harry said. Dumbledore's expression flickered. "From many things. From the wizarding world's expectations. From people who would want to shape you, use you, before you were ready. And from whatever I actually am," Harry said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the most honest version of the sentence. Dumbledore's shoulders settled slightly, a fractional movement that probably looked like nothing, but read, to Harry, as the particular shift of a man acknowledging something true. "I won't pretend the thought wasn't there. I placed you in a house with blood protection, yes, for safety. But I also placed you somewhere ordinary, in the hope that ordinary might, moderate things. That the human life might, anchor, it did," Harry said. "I'm still here, aren't I? Still me." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "You are." "I'm not angry about the cupboard," Harry said, because it seemed important to say. "I know you probably expected them to give me a proper room. They didn't, and it wasn't your fault. And I've actually it's been fine. The dark is easier for me. I think you understand that." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, he said, you are the strangest 6-year-old I have ever encountered. Harry finished his biscuit. I imagine that's true. What do you want, Harry? Dumbledore asked. And there was something careful in the question, something deliberate. Not a trick, Harry thought, but a genuine inquiry, from a man reassessing everything he'd planned to say this evening. To understand what I am, Harry said immediately. Properly. Not in pieces, not in guesses. I want to understand the whole of it. He looked at his hands, small, ordinary child's hands, with the shadows of the kitchen settling around them as naturally as water. And then I want to decide what to do with it. By myself. Dumbledore regarded him. The wizarding world will have opinions, Harry said. I'm sure. And I'll hear them. But I want to understand myself first, before anyone tells me what I should be. He met Dumbledore's eyes again, and this time he didn't moderate whatever showed in his own, and he saw Dumbledore's breath catch slightly, the way it had in the hallway, just a small hitch, a man adjusting to proximity to something vast. Is that reasonable? It is, Dumbledore said. Quietly. Genuinely. It is entirely reasonable. They drank their tea. Outside, it had started to rain, the Surrey evening going dark and gentle, the drops tapping against the kitchen window in an unremarkable rhythm. Harry refilled Dumbledore's cup without being asked, because the kettle was on the counter and it seemed like the right thing to do. There's a school, Dumbledore said, at length. You'll have received no letters yet, you're 6. But in 5 years, when you turn 11, Hogwarts, Harry said. Of course. You know. I'll come, Harry said. I want to come. It sounds, I think there are things I can learn there. Things I can't find in jumble sale encyclopedias. He said this without any self-pity, as pure information. And I want to see the castle. I think it knows me. What do you mean? Dumbledore asked, with genuine alertness. Harry thought about how to say it. Old things recognize each other, he said at last. I've felt Hogwarts. At night, sometimes. The way you feel something big moving in water. I think we're going to understand each other. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. Then, the founders built Hogwarts on a foundation of old magic. Very old. Older than they knew, Harry said. The rain picked up outside. Vernon could be heard muttering something to Petunia upstairs. The house existed around them, ordinary and cramped and smelling of carpet cleaner and cabbage, and in the kitchen Albus Dumbledore and a 6-year-old boy looked at each other across a table and understood, simultaneously, that the world was about to change. I'll make arrangements, Dumbledore said. For your 5th year. I'll ensure that certain difficulties are addressed before then. The Dursleys and I will have a longer conversation. I don't want you to frighten them, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. I beg your pardon. They're not good people, Harry said. But they're afraid people. They've been living with something they can't understand and they don't have the vocabulary for it. Frightening them would just make it worse. He picked up his cup. If you want to help, and I think you do, genuinely, then make them understand that what's here is not going to hurt them. That's all they need to hear. Dumbledore stared at him. What? Harry said. Nothing, Dumbledore said, and his voice had shifted to something that was, unmistakably, something close to wonder. I was simply, you are remarkably, compassionate. For something so, he stopped himself, and had the grace to look as though he were aware he'd nearly said something unfortunate. Old? Harry offered. Dumbledore almost smiled. I was going to say powerful. I'm both, Harry said, with the simple confidence of someone stating height or hair color. But I'm also just me. That part's real too. He stood up and collected the cups and took them to the sink, and that was the end of the conversation, and Dumbledore sat at the table for another few minutes after Harry had gone to say good night, lingered there with the empty cups and the quiet rain and the unshakable sense that whatever plans he had made and would make in the coming years, he was going to need to hold them much more loosely than he'd thought. When he left, walking down the garden path of number 4, shoulders slightly straighter than they'd been when he arrived, as if he'd made some internal adjustment to accommodate a new piece of information about the world, he paused at the gate and looked up at the house. At the small, dark window of the cupboard under the stairs. There was no light in it. There wouldn't have been a light. But for just a moment, standing at the gate in the Surrey rain, Albus Dumbledore had the unmistakable impression that something enormous and patient and very, very old was looking back at him from that darkness. He walked away into the wet evening, and he did not look back again, and he would not sleep particularly well for the next several weeks. Inside, Harry lay on his cot and listened to the rain and thought about the school on its Scottish hill. He thought about the old magic in its stones, and how it would feel to walk through those doors, and whether it would feel like going somewhere new or like going somewhere he'd been before, in a time before time had the shape it had now. The shadows breathed slowly around him. 5 years, he said, to no one. The shadows agreed that 5 years was not very long at all. Harry closed his eyes, and the dark gathered close and gentle, and he slept. Chapter 2, The Letter That Rewrote Itself. The owl died 6 feet from the front door. Not dramatically, no plummet from the sky, no cry. One moment it was descending toward number 4 with the crisp, business-like confidence of a ministry-trained postal bird, Hogwarts letter secured in its talons, and the next moment it simply stopped flying. It landed on the garden path with a soft, bewildered thump and sat there, blinking, feathers slightly raised, looking like a man who had walked into a room and completely forgotten why. Harry, who was watching from the kitchen window while burning absolutely nothing on the hob, observed this with mild curiosity. He dried his hands on the dish towel and went to the front door. The owl looked up at him from the garden path. Its amber eyes were very round. The letter in its talons, cream envelope, green ink, Hogwarts seal in red wax, was trembling slightly. Not from the owl's grip. From something else. Harry crouched down and held out his hand. The owl transferred the letter to his fingers with the air of something completing a duty it was very relieved to be done with, then spread its wings and left without waiting for a response, which was technically against postal protocol but which Harry thought showed excellent instincts. He turned the envelope over. On the back, beneath the seal, the ink was moving. Not smearing. Moving. The letters of his name, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, were rearranging themselves slowly, the way iron filings rearrange around a magnet, reshaping into something else. Something that wasn't English. Wasn't any language Harry had seen in any of the books he'd collected over the past 5 years, and he'd collected a considerable number, proper books now, not just jumble sale encyclopedias, because Dumbledore had arranged a small irregular delivery of texts that could survive proximity to Harry without their ink running off the page. Most books lasted about a week at number 4 before their margins started filling up with script that hadn't been there before. The Dursleys had stopped going into Harry's room. He'd been given Dudley's second bedroom at Dumbledore's quiet insistence 2 years ago, after Petunia had gone in once to change the sheets and come out looking like she'd seen the sea from a very great height and hadn't expected it to be that large. Harry read the new script on the envelope slowly, the way you read something you know somewhere without knowing where you learned it, like a word in a language you've never studied that you somehow understand anyway. It said, "We have been waiting." He turned it over and broke the seal, and the letter inside was, at first glance, a perfectly ordinary Hogwarts acceptance letter, the parchment, the copperplate, the list of required supplies. But when he held it in the thin October morning light, the watermark at the bottom wasn't the Hogwarts crest. It was something older, a sigil that predated the founders, that predated the castle, that predated almost everything in the magical world except the deep magic that lived in the roots of hills. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Who was at the door? Petunia called from upstairs. Post, Harry said, which was technically accurate, and went back to the eggs. He'd expected Hagrid. Or someone like Hagrid, the traditional emissary, the warm giant with the motorbike and the birthday cake and the "You're a wizard, Harry," and the whole necessary ritual of it. He'd read enough in the past 5 years to understand that Hogwarts sent someone for the unusual cases, the children who hadn't grown up in the magical world, and he was certainly that. What he hadn't expected was Hagrid arriving at 11 in the morning on a Thursday, before Vernon had left for work, coming down the street not on the motorbike but on foot, taking up a remarkable amount of pavement, with a pink umbrella that Harry recognized from the descriptions Dumbledore had given in their letters as concealing a wand that had no business being in an umbrella. Harry met him at the gate. Hagrid stopped. He was enormous, Harry had known he would be, had processed the description half-giant with the same equanimity with which he processed most information, but knowing a fact and standing in front of it were different things, and there was something genuinely wonderful about the scale of him, the broad friendly face and the wild beard and the eyes that were dark and warm and currently going through an interesting sequence of expressions. Those expressions were, polite professional readiness, followed by something more uncertain, followed by the particular look of a man who has walked into a room and realized it's very much larger on the inside than the outside suggested. "Rubius Hagrid," Harry said. "Hello." Hagrid said. "Yeah. That's, yeah. Harry Potter?" "Yes. Right." Hagrid rubbed the back of his neck with one enormous hand. "Got a letter for ya." "Well, ye've already got a letter, I can see that. So I suppose I'm here to explain things. Show ye round. Take ye to Diagon Alley." He looked down at Harry with that uncertain expression. It was different from the way most adults looked at him, it wasn't the fear-adjacent thing Vernon had, or Dumbledore's measured fascination. It was simpler. Hagrid was a man who liked things and people openly and without agenda, and whatever he was feeling now was in that register, open, unguarded, trying to work something out. "Dumbledore said you might already know a bit." "A bit," Harry agreed. "Do you want to come in? I can make tea." That'd be great, actually." They went inside. Hagrid navigated the front door by angling himself carefully and then essentially unfolding once inside, and managed to fit himself into the kitchen with the resigned competence of a very large person who has spent a lifetime in spaces built for smaller ones. Vernon, who had appeared at the top of the stairs in a state of preparedness for confrontation that deflated almost immediately upon registering Hagrid's dimensions, retreated without a word. Harry made tea and set out every biscuit in the house, because Hagrid looked like a man who ate biscuits in quantity, and this turned out to be correct. "So," Hagrid said, settled into a chair that was not audibly suffering but was certainly having an experience, "Ye know about Hogwarts?" "Yes." "And about, ye know, magic. The wizarding world." "All of it." "Most of it," Harry said. "The gaps are why I want to come." Hagrid beamed at that, and it was a remarkable beam, it rearranged his entire face, buried his eyes in warm creases. "That's a good reason." He wrapped both enormous hands around his mug. "I should probably tell ya about Voldemort." He said the name without flinching. Harry noted this, because most people in his limited experience of the wizarding world, even at a remove, treated the name like something that could bite. "About what happened when ya were a baby," Harry said. "He killed my parents. Tried to kill me. The curse rebounded." He paused. "Those are the facts that everyone knows. What actually happened is more complicated." Hagrid looked at him steadily. "Ya know what actually happened?" "Some of it," Harry said. "I know that whatever I carry wasn't created by the curse. It existed before the curse. The curse just woke it up more fully." He looked at his tea. "I know there was a prophecy. I know Dumbledore has been very careful about how much to tell me, which I understand, because I've been careful about how much to tell him in return." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "That's," Hagrid stopped. Started again. "Ye're 11. Yes. Most 11-year-olds, when I come to tell him they're a wizard, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of excitement," Harry said. "I have that too. I'm genuinely excited about Hogwarts. I've been looking forward to it for 5 years. He looked up at Hagrid, and let some of that be visible, the real, warm, genuine anticipation of a child who has been waiting a long time for something. I want to learn. I want to learn everything. I want to walk into the Great Hall and I want to see the enchanted ceiling and I want to find out which classes I'm actually good at, which I suspect is all of them, but I want to find out properly. Hagrid stared at him. Then he laughed, a proper laugh, huge and rolling, that made the mugs rattle on their hooks. Merlin, he said. Dumbledore said you were something, but, what did he say, exactly? Hagrid considered how much to share, which Harry respected. He said to be myself. That's always his advice when he thinks the situation's complicated. Be yourself, Hagrid, and trust your instincts. He shook his head slowly, still smiling. I can see why he'd say that. He's a good man, Harry said. Complicated, but good. I think he means well, almost always. The almost is the part one watch. Yeah. Hagrid's smile softened slightly. Yeah, that's fair. They finished their tea, and Harry went upstairs and packed the bag he'd had ready for a week and a half, and came back down, and that was that. Diagon Alley hit Harry like a wave. Not unpleasantly, it was the wave of a warm sea, brightly colored and loud and full of the specific energy of a place that has always existed and knows it, that doesn't need to justify or explain itself, that simply is. Harry stood at the entrance from the leaky cauldron, the wall Hagrid had tapped open with his pink umbrella, and it had opened smoothly, no hesitation, though the bricks had trembled at their edges in a way that Harry suspected had nothing to do with Hagrid's knock, and looked at it all. The shops. The robes in windows. The owls. The children with their parents, the first years wide-eyed and overwhelmed, the older students navigating the crowd with the bored confidence of the accustomed. The smell of the place, parchment and something herbal and something that might have been copper and something else that had no name. And underneath all of it, the magic. Not a feeling, exactly, more like a sound that you sense in your chest rather than your ears. The low vibration of a world built on something very old. Harry's shadows, which were always present and which he'd become expert at keeping minimal and inconspicuous in public, stirred contentedly. Stay, he said, so quietly it was barely a breath. They stilled. Hagrid had people to greet. He was clearly a fixture of Diagon Alley in the way that certain people become fixtures of places they've frequented for decades, hailed from shop fronts and by passing witches and wizards with the warm familiarity of a local landmark. He navigated this with Harry in tow, one enormous hand making sure they didn't get separated in the crowd, the particular care of a large person who knows their navigation style is difficult for smaller ones to follow. They went to Gringotts first. The white building stood at the top of the alley with the self-assurance of an institution that was not merely old but had been old for so long that old didn't really capture it anymore. Harry looked up at the words carved above the doors, the goblin poem about the foolishness of theft, and felt, for the first time that day, something look back. Not the building. Not the wards, exactly, though the wards were there, layered like geological strata, old magic pressing against older magic pressing against something older still. It was the building's awareness of him. The way a dog's ears come forward when it catches a familiar scent from very far away. Hagrid pushed open the bronze doors, then the silver, and they were inside. The entrance hall of Gringotts was tall and white and marbled, lit by chandeliers, lined with goblins behind their high counters in the serious performance of financial management. Harry had barely made it 5 steps inside before he noticed it, the change. Starting from the nearest goblin, spreading like a ripple through still water. Heads coming up from ledgers. Eyes, sharp, dark, deeply intelligent, turning toward the entrance. Toward Harry. And then the nearest goblin, an old one, with the distinctive look of advanced goblin age, deeper carved features, greater stillness, the sense of a patience built over many decades, stepped down from behind his counter. Which was apparently unusual enough that Hagrid made a small sound of surprise. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. His voice was precise and dry, the voice of a being that had been doing arithmetic for longer than most civilizations had existed. "We were notified of your approach." "Were you?" Harry said. "By whom?" "By the wards," the goblin said, as if this were perfectly ordinary. "The deep wards. The ones below the vaults." Harry looked at the floor. Marble, polished to a mirror finish, and beneath the marble the sense of depth. Enormous depth. Something far below that had registered his arrival the way a river registers rain. "I see," Harry said. "My vault, please. And whatever my account manager needs to discuss with me." Hagrid, beside him, was very quiet. Harry glanced up at him and found an expression he'd not seen on Hagrid's face before, not quite awe, but in the same territory. The look of someone recalibrating a context they thought they'd understood. "Right," Hagrid said faintly. "Right, then." The goblin led them. The other goblins watched them go, and Harry would always notice these things, because he had very good peripheral attention, that several of them inclined their heads. Very slightly. The movement you'd make if you were acknowledging something you respected and didn't want to make a production of. He said nothing about it. He simply followed, and let it be what it was. The cart ride was, in purely experiential terms, excellent. Harry gripped the edge of it and felt the cold air of the underground tunnels rushing past and found himself grinning, a proper grin, the kind that happened without thinking about it, the kind that was just a boy on a very fast cart in a very spectacular underground bank. Behind him, Hagrid was making periodic sounds of discomfort, having never quite reconciled himself to the speed. Vault 687. The gold. Harry looked at it without the dazzlement that it seemed designed to produce, the cascade of coins, the gleam of it. What he registered more clearly was the quality of the vault itself. The walls were old. The magic in them was very old. And something in the gold, something faint, a signature barely there, said James, Lily, before them, back and back and back. He took what he needed and nothing more. The journey back up, and then a different cart, a deeper journey, the account manager, a goblin named Ragnock who had the air of a creature that had survived the long tenure of his position by being considerably more intelligent than most of his clients, led them to a room off one of the deep corridors, where the stone was darker and the torches burned a different color. "Sit," Ragnock said. "Not rude. Just direct." Harry respected that. He sat. Hagrid remained standing because the chairs weren't designed for him, and positioned himself near the door with the diplomatic tact of a man pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. "Your family vault," Ragnock said, "is not Vault 687. Harry looked at him. "Tell me more." "Vault 687 is the Potter family vault. Established 4 generations ago. It is your direct inheritance and it is yours without question." Ragnock folded his long-fingered hands on the desk. "There is another vault. Below the deep vaults. Below the dragon levels." He paused, and there was something in the pause that was not uncertainty. Ragnock didn't do uncertainty, but rather the weight of a statement being given its appropriate space. "It was sealed before Gringotts was founded. We built around it. It is not ours to open, and it has never been opened, because the only key to it is the person who exists when the seal recognizes them." The room was very quiet. "It recognized you," Ragnock said, "the moment you crossed the threshold upstairs." Harry leaned back slightly in his chair. The shadows in the corners of the room were listening. "What's in it?" "We don't know." A pause. "In 1100 years of banking, Mr. Potter, there are very few things Gringotts does not know. This is one of them. The vault existed before us. Whatever is inside it existed before the vault." Ragnock looked at him steadily. "We are telling you because it is yours. Because you are, evidently, the person it was sealed for. We are not asking you to open it today, or ever. We are telling you it exists." "I appreciate that," Harry said. "I'll come back for it." Ragnock nodded. "We will be ready." They left, and Harry didn't say anything to Hagrid about it on the cart ride back up, and Hagrid, with the instinctive social grace of a man who understood that some conversations belonged to the person they happened to, didn't ask. The alley itself was an education. Harry moved through it with the particular attention of someone absorbing a new world and cross-referencing it against the version they'd built from books and letters, finding where it matched and where it didn't. Madame Malkin's for robes. The bookshop, which required restraint, he emerged with more books than were technically on the list and experienced no guilt about this. Cauldrons, scales, ingredients. A new trunk, because Hagrid insisted, with that particular gentle insistence that was actually very difficult to say no to, that the old army surplus one Harry had found at a car boot sale wasn't going to do. He was coming out of the apothecary when he heard the voice. Weasley. Not a question, an identification, delivered with the practiced disdain of someone who has learned to use surnames as diminutives. Harry looked across the narrow gap between the shops and saw a blond boy with sharp angles and excellent robes being moved by a man Harry recognized as Lucius Malfoy from the photographs in the books Dumbledore had sent him. The blond boy was looking at a red-headed family with the expression of someone performing contempt they'd been taught rather than arrived at naturally. Harry watched him for a moment. He watched the way the blond boy's eyes moved, quick, assessing, landing on things and evaluating them. The expression on his face when he looked at the Weasleys was automatic, a reflex, a trained response. But underneath it, Harry thought, there was something more interesting. The boy was watching. Watching everyone, the same way Harry was watching him, cataloging and filing. Then the blond boy's eyes cut sideways and found Harry's. He had the look of someone who had been told all his life exactly where he stood and how everyone else ranked, and who was very good at reading the room, and who had just walked into a room that broke his mental model entirely. He stared at Harry, and Harry looked back, and whatever the boy was expecting, deference, invisibility, the particular smallness that was apparently what people expected of Harry Potter before they met him, he didn't get it. What he got was Harry's full attention, which was, several people had discovered, a somewhat overwhelming thing. The blond boy's chin came up. Harry Potter. Draco Malfoy, Harry said. Something flickered in Malfoy's eyes, surprise, recalculated quickly. You know who I am. I did my reading, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy had moved to stand at his son's shoulder, and he brought with him the aura of a man accustomed to controlling the social field, the particular magnetism of old money and political cunning, a man who had survived the fall of Voldemort through careful positioning and remained powerful enough that most people in his vicinity felt the gravitational pull. He looked down at Harry from his considerable height with the measured interest of a man evaluating a piece at auction. Mr. Potter, he said. His voice was smooth, polished, every syllable placed precisely. What a remarkable occasion. Draco has been quite curious about you. I'm quite curious about lots of things, Draco said, with the automatic defensiveness of a boy who doesn't want his curiosity on display, which told Harry a great deal. Harry looked at Lucius. There was something careful in the man's eyes, something that recognized power and was running calculations. Harry was familiar with that look. Dumbledore had it. The Gringotts goblins had it. It was the look of someone who was smart enough to know they were standing next to something significant and was deciding how to position themselves. I'm sure we'll know each other well enough soon, Harry said, which was neither an invitation nor a dismissal, and he could see Lucius parse this with the attention of a man who was very good at parsing. Hogwarts in September. Indeed, Lucius said, with a smooth smile. But his eyes had changed, the calculation was deeper now, and the ease was slightly forced, and Harry noted this without remarking on it. Malfoy, Harry said, to Draco, who was still watching him with that sharp, assessing look. Good to meet you. And he walked on, back toward Hagrid, and the afternoon continued. Ollivanders was last. Harry had been thinking about it all day, not with anxiety, but with the particular interest of someone approaching the most intellectually complex part of an anticipated journey. He knew about wands. He'd read Ollivander's published texts, the theoretical frameworks, the wand lore that filtered into accessible literature. He understood the chosen by the wand mechanism, the relationship between maker and wood and core, and the magic of the witch or wizard it would eventually find. What he didn't know was what would happen when a wand encountered something that predated the entire theoretical framework it operated within. He was about to find out. The shop was narrow and deep, shelves upon shelves disappearing into shadow that was, Harry's senses informed him, natural shadow, just the ordinary dark of an unlit back room, nothing more. It smelled of sawdust and something resinous and something else that he thought might be the accumulated magical residue of 10,000 wands in 10,000 boxes. Ollivander appeared from between the shelves the way a man appears who has been in a small space for so long that they've started to move through it like water through a narrow channel, fluid, inevitable. He was white-haired and pale-eyed, his eyes that particular colorless shade that happens when someone has spent so long focused on extraordinarily fine detail that their gaze has become almost uncomfortably precise. He looked at Harry, and Harry watched the precision of those eyes focus down. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I wondered when you'd come." "Mr. Ollivander," Harry said. "Hello." Ollivander came closer, and his eyes moved over Harry with the attention of a man reading a text, not examining a person. "I remember every wand I've ever sold. Every wood, every core, every witch and wizard who left this shop with one of my creations." He stopped, precisely 2 feet away. "I remember the wands I made for your father and mother. Good wands, both. The wand that," he paused, and something shifted in those pale eyes. "That was used against you on the night of October 31st. I know that wand. I know what was in it." "A phoenix feather," Harry said. "The same phoenix that gave the feather for my wand." Ollivander went very still. Yes. That is quite right." His voice had changed slightly, it had been performing gentle mysteriousness, and now it dropped that and became simply intent. "How do you know this?" "I know things," Harry said, with the same simplicity with which he always said it, because it was always the truest answer. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and went to his shelves. What followed was, Harry would later describe it to Hagrid as interesting, and Hagrid would describe it to Dumbledore as the strangest thing he'd ever seen in 40 years of attending wand selections, approximately 45 minutes of wands. Every wand Ollivander picked up and offered to Harry showed the same pattern. Harry took it, felt the thing within himself that the wand was reaching for, and waited. The wand waited. There was a pause, like 2 people facing each other across a room and neither approaching, and then Harry set it down. Not because the wands were wrong. He could feel each one reaching, genuinely, flexibly, with the real responsiveness that characterized Ollivander's craft. The wands were excellent. They were just, not quite reaching far enough. Like someone trying to shake hands with a man at the bottom of the ocean. Ollivander's expression progressed through focused, then thoughtful, then deeply interested, then something that was very close to emotional, which seemed to surprise him. He went to the back of the shop. He was gone for several minutes. Harry waited, turning slowly to look at the shelves around him, at the stacked boxes and the sense of the wood inside them, thousands of pieces of trees, each carrying the memory of the forest, the accumulated patience of growth. He liked it in here. It had a texture he responded to. Ollivander came back carrying a box that was different from the others, older, darker wood, the gilt letters on the label worn nearly illegible. He opened it with the care of someone opening something they'd been keeping for an occasion they hadn't expected to arrive. The wand inside was black. Not dark wood, black, the color of deep water, of the space between stars, of shadow at its most essential. 13 inches, Harry thought, looking at it. A flexible core, something that moved when he focused on it, that had a quality not of movement but of depth. He picked it up. The shop did several things at once. The candles flared. The shadows on every wall, which were entirely ordinary shadows, folded inward simultaneously, the way cloth folds when something passes through it. The boxes on the nearest shelves moved, not falling, just shifting, as if pressing back. And somewhere outside, on Diagon Alley, there was a brief cessation of noise, a half-second of silence, as if the street had taken a breath. In his hand, the wand was warm. Not warm like a heater, warm like the presence of something ancient, recognizing. It didn't choose him. He understood immediately that the mechanism was reversed here, the wand had been waiting, and it knew him, and the warmth of it was not the warmth of magic selected but the warmth of something returned to its proper place. He looked at Ollivander. The old wandmaker was standing at his counter with both hands pressed flat against the wood, steadying himself. His pale eyes were wet. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was not easily described. It was the expression of a man who has spent his entire life making things and has just understood, in a single clarifying moment, that one of those things was never really his to make. "I made that wand," Ollivander said, and his voice was very quiet, 60 years ago. "I don't know why I made it. I had the wood, it came to me from a tree that died in a forest no one could identify, taken there by a man I'd never seen before and never saw again. And the core," he stopped. "I don't know what the core is. I've never been able to identify it. Every test I've run tells me something different. It's been on that shelf for 60 years and I have never offered it to anyone, because I was waiting." He looked at Harry steadily. "I did not know what I was waiting for. Now I do." Harry turned the wand once in his hand. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Ollivander said immediately. And then, with a small trembling smile, I think perhaps you never did." Harry held the wand still for a moment, feeling the weight of it, which was less than it should have been by physics and more than it should have been by everything else. Then he slid it into the holster Hagrid had bought him, proper wand holster, Harry, none of this carrying it loose in a pocket, and looked at Ollivander. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I know," Ollivander said. And then, quietly, to himself, as Harry turned toward the door, "It's been taking care of itself for 60 years. Harry stepped out onto Diagon Alley, and the afternoon was golden now, dropping toward evening, and the street moved around him in its bright, magical commerce, and Harry stood in it and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific satisfaction of a puzzle whose missing piece has just been found. The journey back to Privet Drive on the Underground, Hagrid taking up a truly extraordinary amount of space in the carriage and generating stares that Harry deflected by simply being 11 years old and sitting next to the enormous man with the complete ease of familiarity, was quiet in a comfortable way. Hagrid had a bag of toffees. He offered them periodically. Harry accepted periodically. They watched London pass through the windows. "Can I ask you something?" Hagrid said, eventually, when they were above ground again and the familiar streets of Surbiton were visible through the glass. "Yes." Are ya frightened? Of any of it?" Harry thought about the question seriously, because Hagrid had asked it seriously. The year at Hogwarts. Voldemort, who everyone knew had not entirely gone. The expectations, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the weight of other people's narratives pressing against the outside of whoever he actually was. "No," he said. Then, more carefully, "not frightened. I'm interested. There's a difference. Most kids your age be terrified," Hagrid said. "Even the ones from wizarding families. First year's daunting. Most kids my age haven't had what I've had," Harry said. "The time. The preparation." He paused. "I've been thinking about what I am for 5 years. You can get used to a lot of things if you have 5 years. What about the other kids?" Hagrid said. "School. Friends." Harry looked at him. "What about them? Do ya hope?" Hagrid stopped, rubbed his beard, tried again. "It can be lonely. Being different. I know something about that." And there it was, the thing that made Harry genuinely like Hagrid, within the first hour of knowing him. The man spoke from the direct experience of a life spent larger than the spaces he was given, and his concern was not strategic or analytical. It was just warm. Just real. "I want friends," Harry said. And it was true, it surprised him slightly by being so straightforwardly true. "I've been alone for a long time. I want to know people. Properly. I want someone to talk to who isn't," he stopped. "Who isn't an ancient wizard being very careful about what he says?" Hagrid offered, with unexpected precision. Harry almost laughed. "Yes. Exactly that." Hagrid beamed. "You'll find Hogwarts it's not perfect, the school, never has been, but it's got good people in it. Always has." "I know," Harry said. He thought about the castle on its hill, the magic in its stones, the sense of it he'd carried for 5 years like a half-remembered song. "I think Hogwarts and I are going to understand each other." "Dumbledore says," Hagrid stopped. "What does Dumbledore say?" Hagrid was quiet for a moment. There was something in the pause that was not evasion but was the careful navigation of a person who is loyal to multiple people and doesn't want to betray either. Harry respected this too. "He says," Hagrid said slowly, "that he's not sure who's going to teach who." Harry turned to look at him, and Hagrid was looking back with those warm dark eyes and that great beard and the expression of a man who has, perhaps, said slightly more than intended. "That's interesting," Harry said. "Yeah," Hagrid said. "I thought so too." The train rattled on through the London suburbs, and the evening came down around the city, and Harry watched the sky go dark and thought about September and the Express and the castle and the year ahead of him, and felt, underneath everything, underneath the immensity of what he was and the complexity of what was coming, the simple, human-scaled excitement of a child about to go to school. That night, back in his room at Privet Drive, he lay on his proper bed and held the wand up in the dark and looked at it. In full darkness it had a quality that wasn't quite visible, not glowing, not luminescent, but present in the way that very old things are present, asserting their existence without requiring light to prove it. He thought about the vault below the vaults. About the letter that rewrote itself. About Draco Malfoy's assessing eyes. About Ollivander's face. About Hagrid's warmth, the easy uncomplicated affection of it, and how it had felt to sit next to someone on a train who wasn't cautious about him. September. The Express. The castle. "We have been waiting," the letter had said. He slid the wand beneath his pillow, and closed his eyes, and the shadows breathed slow and content all around him, and the waiting, for the first time in his long memory of waiting, in whatever timeframe that memory actually covered, was almost over. Chapter 3, Diagon Alley and the Trembling of Old Things. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on platform 9 3/4 by 10:15, which meant he had 45 minutes to stand on a platform full of magical families in various states of organized chaos and simply watch. He was good at watching. He'd had 11 years of practice. The platform had its own ecology. Harry catalogued it the way he catalogued everything, not clinically but with the genuine interest of someone who found people endlessly fascinating when they weren't being directly afraid of him. There were the old wizarding families, identifiable by the ease with which they moved through it all, the absence of wonder in their faces, the particular fluency of people in their native environment. There were the first-generation magical children, Muggleborn, he knew the term, had read the politics around it with the same detached attention he gave most wizarding politics, who arrived wide-eyed, with parents who were either bravely cheerful or quietly terrified, holding their tickets too tightly. He watched a red-haired family arrive in a contained explosion of noise and motion, 6 children that he could count, ranging from what looked like twins around 14 to a girl who appeared to be a year or two ahead of Harry, plus the youngest boy, who was about Harry's age and had a smear of something on his nose that his mother was attempting to address while he leaned away from her thumb with the particular suffering of a boy enduring a public display of maternal care. The Weasleys. Harry had done his reading. He watched the twins, Fred and George, and he knew already which was which from Hagrid's descriptions, George touching the back of his left ear when he was about to say something he found privately funny, pull a trunk off a trolley and immediately get into a good-natured argument about whose job it was to actually get it onto the train. He watched the mother, Molly, try to have 4 conversations at once and succeed at approximately 3 of them. He watched the father, Arthur, standing just outside the family's orbit with the expression of a man who has found his life's greatest source of joy and is periodically overwhelmed by the volume of it. And he watched the youngest boy, Ron, stand on the platform with his own trunk and his rat and the particular look of someone who is very excited and trying not to show it because he is old enough to be slightly embarrassed by excitement. Harry liked him immediately, in the vague abstract way you can like someone before you've spoken a word to them, based purely on the quality of their presence. He was still watching when he felt something else. A different quality of attention, not the low-grade awareness he maintained generally, but the specific sharpening of focus that happened when something in his environment was looking back at him with intention. He turned. Draco Malfoy was standing 20 feet away with two large boys who had the look of people whose primary function in life was to be large and nearby, and he was watching Harry with those sharp, assessing eyes. He gave a small nod when Harry looked at him, not deferential, not quite. The nod of someone acknowledging an equal, or at least someone they've decided to treat as one until further information was available. Harry returned it. Then the train whistled, and the platform became a controlled avalanche of families and trunks and owls, and Harry picked up Hedwig's cage. He'd gotten an owl because Hagrid had insisted an owl was the correct choice and Harry had agreed because Hedwig had looked at him from her cage in the magical menagerie with an expression of such complete self-possession that he'd recognized a kindred quality immediately, and joined the flow toward the train. He found a compartment 3/4 of the way down the train, empty, and put his trunk up in Hedwig's cage on the rack and sat by the window and watched the platform slowly empty as the train prepared to depart. Hedwig made a small sound and rearranged herself on her perch. Harry opened a book. He read 2 pages before the door slid open. The boy who appeared was not Ron Weasley, though he would have been Harry's prediction. He was small and dark-haired and wearing robes that were very neat and carrying a book of his own, and he looked into the compartment with the particular expression of someone running a rapid internal cost-benefit analysis. All the other compartments, Harry inferred, were full. Or full of people this boy didn't particularly want to spend 6 hours with. "Can I sit here?" the boy asked. "Everywhere else is, yes," Harry said. The boy came in and put his own bag up with economical efficiency and sat down across from Harry and looked at Hedwig. "She's beautiful." "She knows," Harry said. Hedwig made a sound that was not smug. "I'm Neville Longbottom," the boy said. "Harry Potter," Harry said. Neville's eyes went wide, which was the standard response, and Harry waited for the rest of it, the Harry Potter, the staring at the forehead, the whole apparatus of the famous boy who lived meeting someone for the first time. Neville did the wide eyes, and then he did something different from most people, which was to visibly collect himself and decide to proceed as if the famous person across from him was simply a person. "I've heard about you," Neville said. "Well, everyone has. But I heard, my Gran mentioned," she said. Dumbledore said. He stopped, flustered. "Sorry. That sounded very roundabout." "What did Dumbledore say?" Harry asked, with genuine interest. He was always interested in what Dumbledore said about him to other people, as data. Neville fidgeted. "He said you were going to be, he said Hogwarts would be different this year." He looked up carefully. "Not bad different. Just different." "That's probably accurate," Harry said. He went back to his book, and Neville went back to his, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, which Harry found he appreciated about Neville almost immediately. The boy was nervous but not constantly performing his nervousness, didn't need to fill silence with noise. They were somewhere past Watford when the door opened again, and this time it was Ron Weasley, with half a pasty in one hand and his rat Scabbers asleep in the other, looking into compartments with the friendly casualness of someone who hasn't yet decided where to land. He saw Harry. He saw Neville. He said, "Any room?" "Yes," Harry said. Ron came in and arranged himself and the rat and the pasty with the comfortable self-organization of a boy who'd been the youngest of many and had learned to slot himself into existing situations without making a production of it. He looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who knows they're looking at someone famous and is trying to be cool about it and not entirely succeeding. "You're Harry Potter," Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Right, Ron said. He offered the pasty. Want some? My mum packed about 1,400 of them. Harry took a piece, because it was offered genuinely and because he was hungry. Ron Weasley, he said. Ron blinked. Yeah. How'd you read about your family, Harry said. Your father works at the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. Your brothers Fred and George are going into 4th year. Your brother Percy just made prefect. Your sister's a year behind us. Ron stared at him. Then, blimey. I did a lot of reading, Harry said. Harry does a lot of reading, Neville confirmed, from behind his book, which was apparently something he'd already clocked as a defining characteristic in the 20 minutes he'd been in the compartment. Ron settled back and ate his pasty and after a moment said, Can I ask you something? Yes. Is it true what people say? I've heard loads of things, from people whose parents, you know. Is it true that when you were a baby, Voldemort, he said it without flinching, which Harry also noted approvingly, tried to kill you and the curse bounced back? That's the version everyone knows, Harry said. Ron frowned. What's the other version? Harry looked at him for a moment. Ron looked back, open, genuinely curious, no agenda visible anywhere in his face. Just a boy who wanted to know things, which was, Harry thought, the best possible reason to ask a question. The other version, Harry said, is that the curse landed, and something in me woke up, and decided it didn't like the curse. He paused. That's all. That's what actually happened. Ron was quiet, working through this. Something in you, he repeated. Then, carefully, what something? That, Harry said, is going to be a longer conversation. Probably not on a train. Fair, Ron said immediately. Not pressed, not pouty. Just, fair. And he offered the pasty again, and they moved on, and Harry thought, yes. This one's going to be someone worth knowing. The witch with the trolley came and went. Neville bought chocolate frogs with the intensity of someone who needed a particular card. Ron shared his mother's sandwiches with both of them and they were the best sandwiches Harry had ever eaten, which made him think about what it meant to have a mother who made sandwiches. He thought about it and then put it away, in the particular mental drawer where he kept things that were true and painful and not urgent enough to need addressing right now. Draco Malfoy appeared in their compartment doorway an hour past Birmingham. He had Crabbe and Goyle at his shoulders, which Harry privately thought was poor staging. 3 people in a doorway suggested intimidation, and if you were trying to make friends with someone you'd met in Diagon Alley, intimidation was a miscalibration. Then again, Draco might not have been sure himself which this was. His face was doing several things at once. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said. I thought we might. He caught sight of Ron and stopped. Something in his expression went from social navigation to automatic disdain, the trained reflex Harry had noticed in Diagon Alley. You're sitting with a Weasley. I'm sitting with Ron, Harry said. And Neville. He looked at Draco steadily. Do you want to come in or not? The or not hung in the air. Draco looked at Ron. Ron looked back at Draco with the particular expression of someone who had a long and fully formed opinion of Draco Malfoy inherited from multiple older siblings and was not bothering to hide it. I'll find you later, Draco said. He looked at Harry as he said it, not Ron, not Neville. Harry. The message was clear enough, there are things to discuss, and I'll discuss them when we have better circumstances. Then he turned and left, and Crabbe and Goyle went with him, and the compartment breathed out. Git, Ron said. He's complicated, Harry said. He's a git. He's a complicated git, Neville said, surprisingly, from behind his chocolate frog. His father was a Death Eater. Or was and said he wasn't. It's hard being a Malfoy right now, is what my gran says. They went from, you know, top of everything, to scrambling to stay respectable. He looked up and apparently registered that both Harry and Ron were looking at him with some surprise. "What?" "I listen to my gran." "Never stop," Harry said, with genuine feeling. "Your gran sounds like a very sensible woman." Neville seemed pleased by this in a way that suggested not many people had said things like that to him before. Scotland came through the windows in its late summer grandeur, hills going gold at the edges, the light taking on the particular clarity of the north, and then the light was fading and the conductor came through to tell them they were approaching Hogsmeade and could they change into their robes, and the compartment became briefly chaotic with trunks and uniforms and scabbers falling off the seat and being retrieved with Neville stepping on no one but nearly. Harry changed and sat back down and looked out at the darkening hills and let the feeling build. The one he'd had for 5 years, the half-remembered song, the pull of something that knew him. It was stronger now, measurably stronger, and getting stronger with each mile. When the train stopped and they piled out into the cool night air and the voice came from the darkness, "Fur's years. Fur's years, over here." Harry looked across the crowd and found Hagrid's lantern and felt, with a sharp clean warmth that surprised him by its sharpness, glad to see a familiar face. Hagrid saw him and raised the lantern slightly, a small greeting, and grinned. Harry raised a hand back. "You know Hagrid?" Ron asked, navigating the crowd at Harry's elbow. "He brought me to Diagon Alley," Harry said. "He's good." "He's enormous," Neville said, with the respect of one who was not. "Also that," Harry agreed. They got into the boats, Harry with Ron and Neville and a girl who introduced herself in one continuous breath as Hermione Granger and had bushy brown hair and an expression of such total focused intensity that Harry recognized it as a kindred quality before she'd finished her own name. She'd already read Hogwarts, a history twice and the Standard Book of Spells twice and 4 other supplementary texts she named by full title, and she was, she said, very much looking forward to Transfiguration. And had they given any thought to the practical applications of switching spells? "No," Ron said. "I've thought about Transfiguration," Harry said. Hermione turned to look at him, really look, the kind of look that evaluated and cross-referenced and found things. Her eyes were sharp and brown and very quick. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about whether Transfiguration is primarily mechanical or whether it requires an understanding of the object being transformed at a more fundamental level," Harry said. "Whether you can transfigure something you don't fully understand." Hermione stared at him. That's actually one of the central debates in advanced transfiguration theory. Dumbledore's position is that it requires conceptual understanding. Fawcett argued it's purely mechanical in the foundational applications. Who do you think's right?" Harry asked. "Dumbledore," Hermione said immediately. "Obviously. Because if it were purely mechanical, you'd expect the same spell from 2 different casters to produce identical results, and it doesn't. It's well documented that the caster's intent and understanding of the subject affects the..." She stopped. "Sorry, I'm talking a lot." "Don't stop," Harry said. "You're interesting." Hermione looked at him as if she weren't sure whether to believe that, or more precisely as if she'd been told some version of "you talk too much" so many times that a genuine invitation to continue came through as possibly suspect. Then she appeared to decide to take it at face value, and kept talking, and Harry listened, because she was interesting. The way her mind moved was quick and structural, building arguments like scaffolding, each piece placed deliberately. Ron, in the bow of the boat, was eating another piece of pasty and watching the dark water and making absolutely no contribution to the Transfiguration debate, which Harry thought was also a valid choice. The boats rounded the rock. And Hogwarts appeared. Harry had imagined it. He'd had 5 years of imagining it, building it from descriptions and photographs and the half-felt presence of it across distance. He'd thought he was prepared for it. He wasn't. Not because it was bigger than he'd imagined, it was, but size wasn't the thing. It was the quality of it. It sat on its rock above the lake with the specific confidence of something that had been there for so long that the landscape had simply built itself around it, arranged itself in deference to the fact of the castle's existence. The towers. The lit windows. The reflection in the black water below, perfect and trembling. And the deep magic in it. The old magic. The thing he'd felt from Privet Drive, from Surrey, from the end of a long 5 years of waiting, it was here, it was present, it was enormous, and it recognized him in the same moment he recognized it, and the recognition moved through him like a bell being struck. Around the boat, the water's surface shivered. Neville gripped the side. What was that? Current, Ron said, not looking up from the water. Harry said nothing. He looked at the castle and the castle looked back, and the exchange was brief and total and private, and then it was done, and they were docking at the underground harbor, and Hermione was saying something about the Founder's wards, and Ron was asking if anyone had another piece of bread, and it was fine. It was more than fine. Professor McGonagall met them at the top of the stairs. Harry had read about McGonagall. He'd formed, from the reading, an impression of a woman who was fundamentally fair in the specific way that required great discipline, who held herself and others to high standards not from cruelty but from the belief that people were capable of meeting them. The woman in front of him matched the impression and exceeded it. She was tall and straight-backed and wore her severity the way very secure people wear it, not as armor but as a natural condition. She spoke to them in the antechamber about the sorting, and her eyes moved across the first-year group with the precise sweep of someone doing rapid assessment, and when they reached Harry they paused for a single beat longer than any of the others. He gave her the small nod. She returned it, fractionally, and moved on. The sorting process happened in the antechamber. The ghosts appeared, translucent and chatty. Harry watched Peeves' non-appearance with interest. He'd read about Peeves, the poltergeist, and he'd been expecting him. He filed the absence for later consideration. Then they were walking through the great hall doors. The ceiling was, in fact, as good as he'd expected, the enchanted sky above the great hall, showing the night and the early stars. He looked at it and felt something settle in his chest that was satisfaction. He looked at the 4 tables, the thousands of candles, the watching older students, the high table where the teachers sat. He found Dumbledore's eyes almost immediately. Dumbledore was sitting in the headmaster's chair looking out at the students with his customary expression of benevolent attention, and when his gaze reached Harry it held there for a moment, that familiar assessment, that careful fascination, and Harry saw, at the edges of it, something that might have been relief. As if he'd been holding a breath for 5 years and had only just begun to release it. Harry looked away first. He looked at the other teachers, McGonagall at the end of the table, already watching the incoming students. A man with a magnificent turban and an expression of tightly controlled something that Harry registered as discomfort. A ghost-pale figure with lank dark hair and eyes like shale who was watching the students with an expression of universal suspicion tempered by particular contempt for most of them. Snape. And the turban, Quirrell. Harry let his attention pass over Quirrell without settling on him, the way you don't stare at something you've already noticed. Then the sorting hat was brought out and put on a stool, and it sang its song, and Harry listened and watched. The names came alphabetically, which put Granger early. Hermione walked up to the stool with her shoulders back and her chin slightly elevated and sat down and had the hat on her head for less than 30 seconds before it called Gryffindor, and she came back to the Gryffindor table with an expression that was trying to be dignified and was mostly just delighted. Longbottom, Neville, took longer, nearly a minute, the hat sitting on his head while he gripped the stool with both hands and appeared to be having a conversation with it. Then Gryffindor, and he exhaled and came to the table and sat down next to Hermione with the look of a boy who hadn't known which outcome to hope for and was now cautiously pleased. Malfoy, Draco, the hat touched his head and said Slytherin before it had settled fully, to what sounded like satisfaction on the Slytherin table and a small snort from the twins section of Gryffindor. More names. More houses. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the conversational quiet between sortings, an actual, held-breath quiet, the kind that descends on a room when something everyone has been anticipating without quite saying so is finally about to happen. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and the hat came down over his eyes and he was in the dark, which was fine, he'd always been fine in the dark, and then something spoke. It had a voice that was old, genuinely old, the accumulated impression of 1,000 years of watching students come and go. It spoke with the confidence of something that had never been wrong before. "Well," it said. And stopped. Harry waited. The hat was quiet for a period that Harry counted internally at approximately 15 seconds. In the hall, that 15 seconds was, by later accounts, possibly the most unnerving 15 seconds the sorting ceremony had ever produced. The hat sat on Harry's head and didn't speak, and the hall sat in its held-breath silence, and even the candles seemed to be waiting. Then the hat said, quietly, so quietly that only Harry heard it, and the students near the front of the hall who were straining to catch any sound, "I have sorted 12,407 students. I have never been unable to find a word. You are the first." Harry didn't say anything. He thought, with mild interest, "That's surprising." "You contain," the hat said, slowly, like something being worked out in real time, "more than I have categories for. You have courage that would honor Gryffindor. Ambition that would prosper in Slytherin. Loyalty that Hufflepuff would cherish. And a mind that Ravenclaw would celebrate. But underneath all of it," it paused again. "Underneath all of it is something that precedes those categories. Something that existed before Salazar and Godric sat down together and tried to decide who was worthy of what." Harry said, internally, "So where do I go?" The hat was quiet for another moment. Then, "Where do you want to go?" "Gryffindor," Harry said. Not because of any calculation. Because Hermione had gone there, and Neville had gone there, and there was something about the thing Gryffindor stood for, facing what frightened you, even when it was very large, that he respected, even if being frightened wasn't something he did very often anymore. Then, the hat said, with what sounded like finality, and perhaps something else, something that might have been the equivalent of a bow from something that didn't bow, "Gryffindor." It said it aloud. The hall erupted. Not politely, with actual noise, the Gryffindor table on its feet, the twins creating what appeared to be a small unauthorized firework display from their sleeves, and even students at the other tables applauding, because whatever the sorting felt like from the outside, and it had felt, to several students and most of the teachers, like watching a very long moment of something not quite identifiable, the outcome of Gryffindor felt right in the way certain outcomes feel inevitable. Harry took the hat off and handed it to Professor McGonagall, who took it with both hands and a look on her face that she immediately reassembled into professional dignity. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat between Hermione and a seat that Ron Weasley would fill in approximately 12 more names. "How long were you up there?" Hermione asked immediately, very quietly, leaning in. "A little while," Harry said. "It was 40 seconds, she said. "I counted." "That's the longest sorting since," she stopped herself with visible effort. "Sorry." "Later." "Later," Harry agreed. The sorting finished. Ron joined them and immediately stole a bread roll and looked at Harry and said, quietly, "The hat was thinking about it, wasn't it?" "A bit," Harry said. Ron looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Gryffindor though." "That's, yeah. Good." And he meant it cleanly, without any complexity, and Harry found that simplicity a relief. The food arrived, and the conversation became noise, and Harry ate and listened and watched and thought, This is what it was supposed to feel like. The dungeons were cold in the way specific to spaces that have been underground for a very long time and have had a very long time to be cold. Harry walked into potions the next morning behind Neville and in front of Hermione and next to Ron, and noted the cold with the mild appreciation of someone who had spent 11 years in a cupboard with shadows for company and found the dark end of the temperature spectrum somewhat congenial. The dungeon was set up in the configuration he'd expected from Hagrid's descriptions and 3 separate published memoirs from former students: long tables, high ceiling, torches at intervals, shelves of ingredients along the walls, and at the front of it all, Severus Snape. Who was, in person, somewhat more interesting than the descriptions had suggested. The published versions of Snape, the memoirs, the oblique references in Hogwarts texts, suggested a man who was primarily a source of discomfort and unfairness. What Harry saw when he looked at him was more complicated. A man who had built an extremely efficient fortress out of contempt and who lived in it with the satisfaction of someone whose defenses have never been meaningfully tested. A man who was, underneath the fortress, something considerably more human, and more pained, than he would ever permit anyone to see. Harry found this interesting. He found most people interesting when you looked past what they were doing to why they were doing it. Snape let them settle. Then he began his lecture in the particular tone, silky, precise, with contempt distributed evenly over the students like a fine mist, and Harry listened with the attention he gave to anything worth learning. Potions was fundamentally chemistry with additional metaphysical dimensions, and he'd done his reading, and the discipline was genuinely complex enough to hold his interest. Potter. Snape said it without looking at his register, which was a performance of knowing already, of having chosen this name in advance. He looked down the table at Harry. Tell me. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The dungeons went quiet. Draught of living death, Harry said. A sleeping potion of extraordinary power. It's the base configuration, there are 12 known variants. The specific qualities of the draught depend on the precise temperature of the infusion at the moment of combination and the geographic origin of the asphodel. He looked at Snape steadily. The Tibetan variant of the root produces a deeper sleep but a significantly more complicated reversal. Most European practitioners default to the Welsh asphodel for manageability. The quiet in the dungeon had changed character. It was no longer the held-breath quiet of students watching someone be put on the spot. It was the different quiet of a room adjusting to new information. Snape looked at him. Something had happened behind those black eyes, the practiced contempt had encountered something it couldn't immediately process, and was briefly at a loss. Where did you find, he started. Doxy's Compendium, Harry said. Advanced Potions Principles, 3rd edition. The Geographic Origin section is in Chapter 11. It's not on the first-year list, but it seemed relevant. He paused. Was that what you were looking for? The pause that followed was roughly 3 seconds long and felt considerably longer. It was, Snape said. His voice had flattened, the theatrical quality of it had dropped, like a man who'd been performing a scene and has just lost the thread of the script. He looked at Harry for another moment, a real look, without the contempt overlay, brief and unguarded, and then he looked at Neville and the contempt came back but directed there now, a tactical redeployment. Neville, who had been sitting to Harry's left, tensed up with the specific tension of someone who has spent every previous day of their life waiting for something like this. Harry felt it, the fine tremor of anticipatory dread, and Harry, without looking at him, shifted slightly so that his shoulder was closer to Neville's. The shadow in the corner of the dungeon, nearest to where Snape was standing, moved. Very slightly. Enough that one of the torches nearest to it guttered, not out, but down, a reduction in light, a little more dark introduced into the space between the professor and the students. Snape looked at the torch. His eyes moved, briefly and sharply, to Harry. Harry was writing the date in his notebook and appeared to not have noticed anything at all. The lesson continued. Defense against the dark arts was different. Quirrell's classroom was on the 3rd floor and smelled aggressively of garlic, every surface garlicked, which was not standard defensive practice, and said several things, all of them interesting. The professor himself was a study in performance, the stutter, the nervous tic, the general impression of a man barely managing. Harry had grown up watching Vernon perform bravado over fear and he could read the mechanism with some fluency, and what he read in Quirrell was not what was being performed. The stutter was controlled. The nervousness had an underneath to it that was not nervousness. The man's eyes, when they moved with a precision that the rest of him was working hard to conceal. Harry sat in the middle of the classroom and watched and said nothing and took his notes and answered the questions he was asked with the appropriate level of knowledge for a first year who had done some extra reading but nothing extraordinary, because this classroom was one where he wanted to understand the full situation before disclosing anything about what he could do. He could feel something from Quirrell. Not the man's own magic, that was modest, well within normal parameters. Something else. Something underneath, or inside, like a second voice in a conversation you're only meant to hear one half of. A pressure, cold and familiar in the abstract way that many things were familiar to Harry, recognizable not from this life but from the long, complicated memory of something much older. He didn't stare at Quirrell any more than he'd stare at anything he'd identified and was monitoring. He wrote his notes and watched from his peripheral vision and kept his own signature, the deep, vast, dark quality of what he was, as quiet as he kept his shadows. Not out of fear. Out of interest. He wanted to see how this played. At the end of the lesson, as students were packing up, Quirrell dropped a text on the floor near where Harry was sitting. Harry picked it up and handed it back, and their hands were briefly close, and Quirrell looked at him. It was Quirrell looking. And then, for the briefest fraction of a second, something else. Harry met the something else's gaze with complete steadiness. The something else, the thing underneath Quirrell, the presence that Harry now identified with full certainty, the cold and once powerful intelligence wearing its borrowed shell, went very still. Not frightened. Something more interesting than frightened. Aware. The moment lasted less than a second. Then Quirrell took his book and turned away, and Harry finished packing his bag and followed the others out, and in the corridor Hermione was asking Ron something about the difference between Wingardium Leviosa and the more advanced levitation variants, and Ron was saying he wasn't sure there was a difference, and Harry listened to this and said, "There are 7 significant variants. The distinction is in the motion of the caster's wrist and the specificity of the mental image of what you want to lift," and the conversation shifted naturally to include him. Later, much later, after dinner and the walk back to Gryffindor Tower and the password and the fat lady, who looked at Harry when he approached the portrait and went very quiet in a way that portraits normally didn't, then straightened herself within her frame and gave him a formal nod that she'd never given any student before, Harry sat in the corner of the common room with Hermione and Ron, and they did their homework, and it was warm, and the fire was going, and Neville had fallen asleep over a herbology text at the next table, and it was ordinary. Genuinely, unremarkably ordinary. Harry finished his essay on the properties of dragon blood and put his quill down and looked at the fire and thought about Quirrell. About the thing underneath. About the moment of mutual recognition in the classroom. About the quality of that intelligence, diminished from what it had been, compressed into a situation it had not chosen, cold with something that was not patience but was using patience as shape because it had no other options. "You're thinking," Hermione said, without looking up from her Transfiguration essay. "Usually," Harry said. "You're thinking about something specific," she said. "You get a particular look." "What look?" She glanced up. "Like something very old looking through something young," she said, and then seemed to surprise herself with the accuracy of her own description and looked back at her essay quickly. Ron, who was supposed to be writing about the Standard Book of Spells, had his quill in his mouth and was watching Harry over the top of his parchment. He had the particular look of someone who had decided several things over the past day and was in the process of deciding a few more. "You knew something was off about Quirrell," Ron said. "Not a question." "Yes," Harry said. "What was it?" Harry thought about how to answer this honestly without disclosing more than was useful right now. "Something's not quite right about him," he said. "I want to watch for a while before I say more." Ron accepted this with the practical equanimity that Harry was coming to identify as one of his defining traits. Hermione did not accept it quite as equably. She was the kind of person whose response to incomplete information was to ask more questions, but she appeared to be exercising restraint. "All right," she said, instead of the 5 questions Harry could see sitting on her face. "But when there's more to say, I'll tell you," Harry said. "Both of you. I promise." The fire crackled. Neville snored gently. Outside the tower windows, the Scottish night pressed against the glass, vast and dark and full of stars, and Hogwarts breathed slowly around them, old stone and old magic and the long, patient intelligence of a place that had seen many things happen within its walls and had its own feelings about most of them. Harry picked his quill back up, and wrote the last 2 lines of his essay, and the common room was warm, and the night was long, and tomorrow there would be more to learn. He was looking forward to it. Chapter 4, the sorting that wasn't the first week at Hogwarts established several things quickly. The first was that Harry was good at everything, which he'd expected, and that being good at everything in a room full of people who were good at some things required a certain calibration, not hiding, which he refused to do on principle, but not turning every class into a demonstration either. He answered questions when asked, completed work to the standard it deserved, and let the quality of the work speak without commentary. The second was that Hermione Granger was, academically, the most formidable person in his year, which he'd suspected from the train and confirmed within 48 hours, and that this made her interesting in a way that most people were not. She'd read everything he'd read, or close to it, and where her reading overlapped with his they could have actual conversations rather than explanations, which was significantly more satisfying. The third was that Ron Weasley had a chess set that he played with the intensity of a military commander, and that the chess set, old, battered, the pieces worn from years of Weasley use, had the particular loyalty of magical objects that have been owned by one family long enough to develop opinions. The knight, Harry noticed, deferred to Ron in the specific way that old soldiers defer to commanders they've decided to trust. He watched Ron play Seamus Finnegan on the third evening and understood within 10 minutes that Ron was, strategically, genuinely exceptional, which was not what most people saw when they looked at him. "You're very good," Harry told him, when Seamus conceded with the grace of a man who'd known it was coming for the past 6 moves. Ron shrugged in the way people shrug when they're pleased but have been told often enough that chess doesn't really count as something to be proud of, that the pleasure comes with defensive packaging. "It's just chess. Strategy is strategy," Harry said. "The pieces are different but the thinking is the same." Ron looked at him. "Are you actually interested in chess or are you just being nice?" "I don't do just being nice," Harry said. "I'm interested in how you think." Ron appeared to find this simultaneously flattering and slightly unnerving, which Harry thought was a reasonable response. The fourth thing the first week established was that Hogwarts itself was paying attention to Harry in a way it didn't pay attention to other students. He'd felt it from the boats. He felt it more specifically now, the way the castle's architecture seemed to cooperate with him. Corridors that should have led one way opening differently when he was slightly late to class, staircases moving with a timing that was perhaps not entirely coincidental, the torches in the hallways burning fractionally brighter when he walked under them, as if the castle were turning its face toward him the way plants turn toward light. He tested it, once, deliberately, took a wrong turning on the second floor, ended up facing a blank wall, put his hand flat against the stone and thought about where he needed to go. The wall didn't open. Nothing dramatic happened. But when he turned around, the corridor had rearranged, or he had turned the right way without noticing, and there was the staircase to Transfiguration, right there. "Thank you," he said quietly, to the wall. The stone was warm under his palm. Warmer than it should have been. Transfiguration was McGonagall's classroom, which meant it was also McGonagall's domain in the complete sense. Everything in it was arranged to her standards and reflected her sensibility, which was the sensibility of a woman who had been doing something excellently for a very long time and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. She began by transforming her desk into a pig and back, which Harry appreciated as an efficient way to establish credibility, and then set them to turning a matchstick into a needle. By the end of the lesson, Harry's matchstick had become a needle, a small folding knife, a needle again, and, for approximately 30 seconds that he then walked back, a piece of material he had no name for, dark and oddly warm, that existed in the space between solid and something else before he returned it to needle state and set it down with the equanimity of someone noting an unexpected result in an experiment. McGonagall had been watching. She came to stand beside his desk after the lesson, after the others had filed out, and looked at the needle. "What was the third transformation?" she asked. "Direct. No preamble." "I'm not sure," Harry said honestly. "I was thinking about what a matchstick actually is, carbon, essentially, the memory of wood, and then about what a needle is, pure function, a thing that exists entirely for its purpose, and I got interested in what something would be if it existed in the same way. If its substance was purely its function." He picked up the needle. "It didn't have a name. I didn't know what to call it, so I brought it back. McGonagall was very still in the way she was still when she was processing something with full attention. That, she said, carefully, is not first-year transfiguration. No, Harry agreed. That is not, in fact, any year of transfiguration that is formally categorized. I know. She looked at him for a long moment with the eyes of a woman who had taught for 40 years and encountered the full range of student ability and had just encountered something outside the range. I would like you to write me an essay, she said. Not on the curriculum. On what you were thinking about when you made the third transformation. What the object would have been, if you'd continued. All right, Harry said. Also, she said, and now there was something that was not quite warmth but was in the same family, the particular tone of a fair person acknowledging a fact they respect, your needle is quite good. Harry looked at the needle. Yours was better, he said. The speed of the return transformation. I haven't got that yet. McGonagall blinked. It was the blink of someone who had expected a great many responses and not this one. Then, with the precision of a woman reassembling her customary expression, no. You haven't. Come find me when you do. Peeves had been avoiding Harry. This was something that several students had noticed and none could explain, because Peeves avoided no one. It was fundamentally contrary to his nature, a poltergeist being constitutionally incapable of voluntary restraint. He heckled professors. He threw things at prefects. He'd once, in living Hogwarts memory, had a 40-minute confrontation with Dumbledore himself that had ended in stalemate and was regarded as one of the great social achievements of poltergeist history. He gave Harry a radius of roughly 30 feet and maintained it with the focused dedication of someone who has identified a rule and intends to follow it. Fred Weasley had asked him about it, loudly, in the corridor on the 5th day, because Fred asked most things loudly and filtered for appropriateness after the fact. Peeves had gone luminously offended and made a noise like a kettle and maintained the 30 feet regardless, and Fred had come to find Harry in the common room afterward with the specific expression of someone who has accidentally stumbled onto a very interesting mystery. What did you do to Peeves? He said. Nothing, Harry said. He won't come within, I know. I haven't done anything. Harry considered this. I think he just knows something. Fred stared at him. Fred's sense of humor, Harry had come to appreciate, was both his primary mode of engagement with the world and a screen behind which he observed it very accurately. He was watching Harry now without the screen up, which was brief and direct. Right, he said. Right. I'm going to think about that. Let me know what you work out, Harry said. Fred left. George appeared in the doorway, as if they operated on some internal signal system. George looked at Harry with slightly different eyes. Where Fred's humor was expressive, George's was thoughtful, the same intelligence operating with more patience. We're going to be watching you, he said. Friendly terms. Just so you know. I appreciate it, Harry said, and meant it. The letter from Dumbledore arrived on Thursday morning with Harry's post. Hedwig dropped it in front of him with the particular satisfaction of an owl who has made a difficult delivery and knows it, and it was brief, which was how Dumbledore was when he was saying something he wanted Harry to actually hear rather than something he wanted Harry to sit with. I trust your first week is going well. I wonder if you might come to my office Sunday after lunch. There are things worth discussing now that you're here, and things that are worth discussing only with some distance from the rest of the school's company. I hope you'll find time. Also, I'm told by Professor McGonagall that your matchstick became something that doesn't have a name yet. I confess I'm very curious. Albus Harry read it twice and wrote back, Sunday after lunch, yes. My matchstick was more interested than I expected. He sent Hedwig off with the response and went back to his porridge and the problem he'd been working through in his head since the previous evening, which was not academic but was related to Quirrell's classroom and the quality of the presence he'd registered there and what its intentions were likely to be as the year progressed. You're doing it again, Hermione said, from across the table. I know, Harry said. The thing where you're somewhere else while appearing to eat breakfast. Important thinking, Ron said authoritatively, from behind his own bowl. Don't interrupt important thinking. Hermione gave Ron a look that expressed several things about the relative importance of thinking versus communication, then turned back to Harry. It's about Quirrell, isn't it? Harry looked at her. Why Quirrell? Because you've been paying attention in that class differently from all the others, she said. In McGonagall you're interested. In Flitwick you're engaged. In Quirrell you're watching. It's a different kind of attention. She had her hands around her pumpkin juice and was looking at him with that direct, brown-eyed focus that Harry was coming to understand was simply how she was, that the intensity wasn't performance, it was just the natural operating state of a mind that didn't know how to be less than fully present. I noticed the same thing. About him. He's not what he looks like. No, Harry said. He's not. There's something wrong with him, she said carefully. Something, Hermione. Harry put his spoon down. Yes. There's something wrong. I'm working out what to do about it. He paused. I'll tell you both properly when I know more. I promised. But right now I need more information, and I need to be careful about how I get it. She held his gaze for a moment, the look of someone deciding whether to accept incomplete information and wait, which went against every instinct but was sometimes the correct choice. Then she nodded, once, the sharp decisive nod of a person who has made up their mind. All right. I'm glad we've established that there's something going on with Quirrell, Ron said, because I've been thinking he's a bit odd since day one, only I thought I was just being thick. You weren't, Harry said. Brilliant, Ron said, and went back to his bowl, satisfied. Sunday after lunch, Harry climbed to the 7th floor and knocked on the gargoyle and said the password, Sherbet Lemon, which struck him as both very Dumbledore and slightly absurd, and rode the moving staircase up and knocked on the inner door. Come in, Harry. The office was what Harry had expected from the outside and more than he'd expected from the inside, full of the accumulated material of a very long and very active life, instruments and portraits and books stacked on surfaces that could not have been described as tidy except in a specific sense that the person who inhabited them knew where everything was. The portraits of former headmasters dozed in their frames. Fawkes, the phoenix, sat on his perch near the window and looked at Harry with the particular eyes of something very old that has found a reason to remain interested in the world. Fawkes and Harry looked at each other for a moment. Fawkes made a sound, not a song, something smaller, a note or two. Harry felt the warmth of it, the specific quality of phoenix fire, ancient and renewal-oriented and nothing like his own particular ancient, which was the cold end of the spectrum. They were not the same thing. They recognized each other anyway. He's never done that for a student, Dumbledore said, from behind his desk, where he was watching with those half-moon eyes that were doing their careful work. We understand each other, Harry said, and sat in the chair across the desk, which was a comfortable chair. Dumbledore's office chairs were comfortable in the way that suggested he actually wanted the people in them to relax, which was a good sign about a man. How is the first week? Good. Very good, actually. Harry thought about Ron and Hermione and Neville, about McGonagall's look when he described the nameless object, about Hagrid's tea on Friday evening in the grounds with the baby hippogriff that Hagrid was raising and which had been deeply confused by Harry, walking around him 4 times and then sitting directly on his feet. I like it here. I'm glad. And Dumbledore meant it. Harry could read sincerity in him fairly easily now, could distinguish it from the more careful versions of himself, the Dumbledore who was strategic and deliberate. This was the simpler version. The castle likes me, Harry said. Yes. I've noticed. The founders built significant sentience into Hogwarts, Dumbledore said. More than most people know. More than I knew, for many years. He leaned back slightly. It hasn't responded to a student the way it's responding to you. Not in my 40-odd years here. I spoke to it, Harry said. On the wall, 2nd floor. I didn't expect it to work. What did you say? Just where I needed to go. And thank you, after. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, which was the quiet of something being genuinely felt. Of course you did, he said, and the warmth in his voice was uncomplicated. "Of course you said thank you." Harry smiled, fractionally. "You're very easy to surprise." "You're very surprising," Dumbledore said, with equal simplicity. Then, shifting, "I want to talk to you about something, and I want to be direct, because I think you appreciate directness and because I think you deserve it." He folded his hands. "There is something in this school that shouldn't be here. An object, currently secured in the third-floor corridor. Brought here because it needed to be kept safe, because it was at Gringotts and something, tried to access it." Harry felt the shape of this. He'd been thinking about the third-floor corridor, about the Cerberus that Hagrid had mentioned with the particular guilty pride of someone who has done something exciting and can't quite not tell someone. "The Philosopher's Stone," he said. Dumbledore did not visibly react, because he was practiced at not visibly reacting, but Harry noted the stillness that preceded his response. "You knew." "I worked it out. Nicholas Flamel's name is in most alchemy texts." "It wasn't difficult." Harry paused. "What tried to access the vault at Gringotts?" "We believe," Dumbledore said carefully, "that it was a servant of Lord Voldemort. Someone working toward his return." "Or someone who is Lord Voldemort," Harry said. "In some diminished form." The office was quiet. In his portrait, Phineas Nigellus Black had stopped pretending to be asleep and was watching the conversation with undisguised interest. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the particular quality of attention that surfaced in him when he was deciding how honest to be, how much of what he knew to offer, against what he felt should be discovered. "Harry," he said. "Professor Quirrell," Harry said. "I know. I've known since the first defense lesson." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "He's carrying something. Something that isn't him. The garlic is theatrical misdirection. It's not the smell, it's the way the smell functions as a reason for people not to get close to him." He paused. "What's on the back of his head?" The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds. "How do you?" Dumbledore started. "Because it looked back at me," Harry said. "In the classroom. Our hands were close and it looked at me, and I looked at it." He thought about those 3 seconds of contact, the cold press of a diminished but significant intelligence, the recognition that had moved through it like a current. "It knows I'm here. And it's recalculating." Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression that Harry identified as something he'd seen before, on the floor of number 4's hallway, that particular combination of awe and the recalibration of a man adjusting his model of reality. "It doesn't know what you are," Dumbledore said. "Not a question." "Nobody does," Harry said. "Including me, entirely. But it knows I'm not what it expected." "No," Dumbledore said softly. "No, I imagine you're not." He looked at the Phoenix for a moment, in the way of a man collecting himself. "Then, what would you like to do?" Harry looked at him. The question was genuine, not what should I allow you to do, not what do you think is happening, but what do you want, and the openness of it was the Dumbledore who'd sat at the kitchen table in Privet Drive and drunk his tea and made room for the fact that Harry was going to decide things for himself. "Watch," Harry said. "For now. Let him move. Let Voldemort make the decisions he's going to make, and understand the shape of the plan before I respond to it." He paused. "Is the stone adequately protected?" "There are several layers of protection," Dumbledore said. "Including, I believe, some challenges that I rather hope will occupy any intruder long enough for assistance to arrive." "I'll add my own," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyebrows moved fractionally upward. "I beg your pardon." "To the protections. I'll add something." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "If that's all right." The pause that followed had the quality of a man wrestling with several competing impulses. "Then, would you show me what you intend to add?" "No," Harry said, pleasantly. Dumbledore blinked. "No. You'd worry about it. And then you'd want to adjust it, or categorize it, or fit it into a framework, and it doesn't fit into a framework, and the adjustment would make it weaker. Harry tilted his head slightly. Trust me. Another pause. Considerably longer. Fawkes made a small sound that Harry privately interpreted as the Phoenix equivalent of "he has a point." "Very well," Dumbledore said, at length, with the particular dignity of a very powerful man who has just agreed to something he doesn't fully understand and has decided this is acceptable. "I'll arrange access to the third-floor corridor. Tonight, if possible," Harry said. "After 11. I'll see what I can do." "A beat. Do you need accompaniment?" "No," Harry said. "Thank you." He stood up, and Fawkes made the small sound again, and Harry stopped on his way to the door and looked at the Phoenix. He extended one finger, and Fawkes looked at it, and then at Harry's face, and then, slowly, with the deliberate quality of something that was choosing rather than being trained, leaned forward and touched his beak to Harry's knuckle. A brief warmth. Different from shadows. Complimentary. "Thank you," Harry said to the Phoenix, and then to Dumbledore, and went back down the moving staircase and out into the castle. The third-floor corridor at 11:30 was quiet in the specific way of a place that is being guarded and knows it, where the guards are real and paying attention and the silence is not peaceful but alert. Harry had gotten out of the common room using the simple expedient of waiting until after midnight's half-hour when the fire burned low and the last students had gone to bed, and then walking out, because he didn't have an invisibility cloak and didn't need one. The castle adjusted the light around him when he asked it to, and the part of him that was old and dark moved through Hogwarts's nighttime corridors the way depth moves through water, unremarkably. The locked door on the third floor opened without being touched. Harry stepped inside. Fluffy was, in fact, enormous. 3 heads, each the size of a cart, the body beyond scale in the way of certain magical creatures, not big the way a large dog is big, but big the way a force of nature is large, occupying space with the authority of something that has never been told it shouldn't. All 3 heads were awake, tracking him the moment the door opened, the sound in their throat the low continuous warning of animals that are prepared to be significantly more than warning. Harry stopped. He looked at all 3 heads in sequence, left, center, right. Each pair of eyes was yellow gold and enormous and currently broadcasting very specific intentions. He didn't move. He didn't raise his hand or make a calming gesture or use any of the animal handling techniques he'd read about. He just looked at them, and let them look at him, and the thing behind his eyes, the deep, dark, patient enormity, was present in his gaze without being weaponized. Just there. Just what he was. The growl slowed. Not stopped, slowed. From warning to something more like assessment. "I'm not taking anything," Harry said. "I'm just going through." The center head regarded him for a long moment. Then it sat down. The other 2, taking the cue, sat down as well, and the sound in their throat died down to a low ambient rumble that was suspicious but not aggressive. "Thank you," Harry said, and walked forward. The trapdoor was under Fluffy's right foot, which he moved when Harry indicated it with a look, with the air of something making a concession it wasn't unhappy about. Harry dropped through. What followed was the series of protections, the devil's snare, which recoiled from his shadow before he'd done anything, the flying keys with their own enchantment that he observed with appreciation, the chess set that he played through in 6 moves that were more than sufficient, the troll that was already unconscious and that he stepped around with care, the potions puzzle that he solved in approximately 30 seconds because logic and chemistry were the same subject with different names. And then the final door. The mirror of Eriste stood in the center of the last chamber, tall, ornate, self-satisfied with its own mystery in the way that magical objects sometimes were. Harry walked up to it and looked at it. The mirror showed him what he wanted most. He stood in front of it for a long moment. He looked at what it showed, really looked, because he was capable of looking at difficult things directly. What he saw was not what he'd expected. Not his parents, though they were there, real and warm and clear, and the warmth of seeing them moved through him with a sharpness that was human and immediate and had nothing to do with anything ancient. Not himself as some more powerful version. Not dominion or knowledge or any of the things that the deep part of him might have been expected to want. What the mirror showed him was the common room. Ron and Hermione and Neville at the table by the fire, doing homework. The ordinary, specific, human-scaled scene of it. Himself, sitting with them. He looked at this for a long time. Then he looked away, because he'd understood what the mirror was doing and he had no intention of standing in front of it any longer than necessary. He turned to the space to the left of the mirror, the empty air between it and the wall, and he crouched down. What he placed there was not visible. It had no form in the conventional sense, no material substance that could be detected by standard magical means. It was a piece of what he was, not a large piece, nothing that diminished him, but a genuine piece, like a note placed in a room that anyone who entered would hear whether they wanted to or not. It said, in terms that were not language but were older than language, "You are seen, and I am here, and what you want to take is beyond you." Not a threat. A fact. He stood up and looked at the room one more time, the mirror, the protections, the deep underground quality of the space, and then walked back through all of it in reverse and was out in the third-floor corridor and the door closed behind him. He was back in the Gryffindor common room by 1 in the morning, and the fire was low, and the room was quiet, and he sat in the chair nearest the hearth and looked at the embers. After a few minutes, Ron came downstairs. Harry looked at him. Ron was in his pajamas and had clearly not been fully asleep. He sat in the other chair and looked at the fire. "You went somewhere," Ron said. Not accusatory. Not even really a question. "Yes," Harry said. "Something to do with Quirrell." "Something to do with the school," Harry said. "With something in it that needs protecting." He paused. "I'll explain more in the morning. I promise." Ron looked at him sideways. "You're always going to be doing things, aren't you? Things that are just slightly outside what a normal first year does." "Probably," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. "Right," he said. Yeah, all right. I can work with that." He pulled his knees up in the chair, which was a position that suggested he had no intention of going anywhere for a while, and stared at the fire. "My mum would say I should be worried about you. My dad would probably want to know every detail." "And you?" Harry asked. Ron thought about this with the genuine seriousness he brought to things he actually cared about, which was different from the casual surface he presented to most situations. "I reckon," he said slowly, "that whatever you're dealing with it better than most people would. And I reckon that if you needed help, you'd say." He glanced at Harry. "You would, right? Say." "Yes," Harry said. "And meant it." "Then I'm not worried," Ron said, with a finality that was both simple and absolute, the way loyalty is when it's not complicated by agenda. He looked at the dying fire. "Hermione's going to want a full report at breakfast." "I know," Harry said. "I'm going to have to explain why I was awake at 1 in the morning. Tell her you were hungry. She'll know that's true and also not the whole story." "Yes," Harry said. "She will." Ron accepted this philosophically. They sat by the dying fire in a comfortable silence that had the quality of something established, not new, not careful, but already known, already settled, and outside the tower windows the Scottish night was vast and cold and full of stars, and the castle breathed around them. "Harry," Ron said, after a while. "Yes. Whatever's in the school. Whatever you put in place tonight." He was looking at the embers. It worked. Harry thought about the piece of himself he'd left in the underground chamber. The note in old dark language that no diminished spirit wearing a professor's face was going to touch without consequence. "Yes," he said. "It worked." "Good," Ron said. And then, with the quiet confidence of someone who has made a decision and is not looking to revisit it, "Good." The fire burned down to nothing, and the shadows gathered soft and close, and Harry sat in the dark chair in the Gryffindor common room with the red ember light on his face and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember feeling anything as simply as this, that he was in exactly the right place. Chapter 5. What Professors Fear. October came to Hogwarts the way it always did, suddenly, as if September had been a rehearsal and the real season had decided to stop waiting. The trees around the lake went gold and red overnight, or close enough to overnight that students who'd gone to bed in late summer woke up in autumn without the transition, and the mornings got sharp and the evenings got long and the castle settled into itself with the particular satisfaction of a place that has its best season. Harry noticed all of it. He noticed the way the light came through the great hall windows differently now, longer and more amber, the way the lake's surface changed from the flat grey of September to the dark, textured surface of proper autumn, the way the torches in the corridors were more present somehow, more golden against the darker evenings. He noticed because he paid attention to things, and because the castle showed him things, turned his attention gently in directions worth looking, the way a hand at the elbow guides you toward something. He was sitting in the stands above the Quidditch pitch on a Tuesday morning before breakfast, watching the Gryffindor Quidditch team practice in the early light. This was not because he'd been invited, he'd simply come, the way he went most places at Hogwarts, because he wanted to and because wanting to was sufficient reason. Oliver Wood had noticed him on the first practice and had said, with some suspicion, "You're Potter." "Yes," Harry had said. "You're not on the team." "No," Harry had agreed. "I'm watching." Wood had looked at him for a long moment. Wood was a captain in the purest sense, a person for whom Quidditch occupied the space in his soul that other people reserved for philosophy or religion, and he read the pitch the way serious people read important texts. Whatever he'd seen when he looked at Harry had been sufficient, because he'd nodded and gone back to his clipboard and Harry had stayed. He came back 3 mornings a week after that, and he watched, and Wood had stopped acknowledging it and started simply including him in the ambient awareness of the pitch, the way you include a known presence in a space you understand. What Harry watched was not simply the practice. He watched how Wood managed his players, the twins as beaters, Alicia Spinnet and the other chasers, the keeper. He watched the way Wood adapted when something wasn't working, the way he held a team together that had 3 very different kinds of confidence in it. And he watched the sky. The sky at Hogwarts was, in his experience, the most honest thing about the place. The great hall ceiling was a copy of it, beautiful, accurate, but a copy. Up here, above the pitch, it was just the sky, and this morning it was the particular pale Scottish blue of an early autumn morning with the last stars still visible in the west and the sun coming up bronze and precise over the eastern hills. He was thinking about Quirrell. More specifically, he was thinking about the pattern of Quirrell's behavior over the past month, because patterns were how you understood things in the absence of full information and Quirrell's pattern was becoming clearer. The professor got worse on Thursdays. Not worse in terms of performance, his teaching remained at the same undistinguished level throughout the week, but worse in terms of the suppressed presence Harry could feel from him, the thing underneath. Thursdays, it was more present. More active. As if something happened Wednesday nights. He was still thinking about this when he heard footsteps on the stands below him, and looked down, and found Draco Malfoy coming up the steps alone, which was genuinely unusual. Malfoy almost always had Crabbe and Goyle in his orbit, not so much by choice as by the social gravity of having been given bodyguards so young that their presence had become automatic. Malfoy stopped 2 rows below Harry, looked up at him, and said, "I thought I'd find you here." "You were looking for me specifically?" Harry asked. "I asked the castle," Malfoy said. Then stopped, as if he'd surprised himself by saying it plainly. "I mean, the corridors seem to, you asked the castle," Harry said. "I do that too." "Sit down, Malfoy." Malfoy sat. He looked at the pitch, where Wood was running the chasers through a formation drill, and then at Harry with those sharp grey eyes that were, Harry had come to understand, in constant motion, cataloguing, evaluating, running the arithmetic of every situation. "We haven't talked," Malfoy said. "Since Diagon Alley." "No," Harry said. "You've been deciding things." Malfoy's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Deciding what?" "Whether I'm worth the complication." Harry looked at him without heat. "I understand. Your position is complicated." Slytherin has expectations. Your father has expectations. And I'm not what anyone expected, which means fitting me into the existing framework doesn't work, and that's uncomfortable for people who rely on frameworks. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. Below them, Wood shouted something at the twins about formation. My father, Malfoy said carefully, was very interested when I told him I'd met you in Diagon Alley. I imagine. He wanted me to cultivate. That's the word he used. Cultivate the connection. He said the word with a slight edge that was not quite mockery but was doing something more complex, acknowledging the calculation in it while simultaneously separating himself from it. He thinks you'll be important. Politically. He's right, Harry said. Though probably not in the way he's calculating. Malfoy's mouth did something that was almost a smile. That's what I thought. He looked back at the pitch. I'm not my father. I know, Harry said. You can't know that, Malfoy said, with a flash of actual feeling, not quite indignation, but the particular heat of someone who's been reduced to their family before and is tired of it. We've barely spoken. I'm good at reading people, Harry said. You're performing your father's worldview because you've never been given a different framework for understanding your own. But the assessment you're running right now, the one about whether I'm worth talking to on your own terms rather than his, that's yours. That's not Lucius Malfoy's arithmetic. He paused. Also, you came up here alone. You didn't bring Crabbe and Goyle, which means you didn't want witnesses to this conversation, which means it's genuinely yours. The silence that followed was the silence of a person being seen more clearly than they expected and having to decide how to respond to it. You're very strange, Malfoy said. Yes, Harry said. The way he stopped. Started again. People talk about you. At Hogwarts, in Slytherin. The older students especially. They say something's different about you. That you're not, another stop. There's a third-year Slytherin who said his father mentioned that Dumbledore came to see your family when you were very young and that when he came back he wasn't quite the same. Harry said nothing. Is that true? What do you think? Harry said. Malfoy looked at him, the full, direct look of someone dropping the performance temporarily. I think Dumbledore has never been quite the same since meeting you and that nobody in this school understands why and that you understand everything perfectly and are watching all of us figure it out. He paused. How close am I? Very, Harry said, with genuine appreciation. Malfoy exhaled. It was the exhale of a pressure valve, something that had been building released, not explosively but with the relief of something finally permitted. All right, he said. Good. I wanted to know if you were what I thought you were. And? I think, Malfoy said, that my father's calculation is completely wrong and that whatever he's planning doesn't account for you at all, and that this is going to be a problem for him. He said this with the particular flatness of someone reporting a conclusion they've reached and have some complicated feelings about. I don't know what I'm going to do about that yet. You don't have to know yet, Harry said. You're 11. So are you, Malfoy said, sharply. I've had longer to work things out, Harry said, which was technically an enormous understatement. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the pitch, where Wood had gathered the team together for what appeared to be an impassioned strategic address. Can I come back, he said. To watch. Practice, or whatever. Yes, Harry said. They sat in silence for the rest of the practice, watching Oliver Wood conduct his team with the focused intensity of a person who has found their purpose and is completely comfortable with how consuming it is, and the morning got lighter and brighter around them, and Harry thought about the fact that Draco Malfoy had come to find him independently, had dropped the performance, had said I'm not my father like it was something he needed to hear himself say out loud, and thought that this was one of the more interesting things to happen so far this year, which was a year with quite a lot of interesting things in it. The Quidditch match was on a Saturday in November, Gryffindor against Slytherin, and Harry watched it from the stands between Ron and Hermione with the whole of Gryffindor House in various states of coordinated anxiety behind him. He'd been offered a spot on the team 3 weeks earlier. Wood had come to find him after practice one morning and said, in the focused, direct way of a man who had been building to something, "You've been watching us for weeks." "Yes," Harry had said. "You understand the game." "It's not complicated," Harry'd said, which was not quite the same as saying it wasn't interesting, and Wood had seemed to understand this. "Can you fly?" Harry had thought about this. He'd been on a school broom once, briefly, a week into term, during the flying lesson that Madame Hooch had conducted with the terrified efficiency of someone aware that she was responsible for 20 children on broomsticks at various heights. He'd been on the broom for approximately 3 minutes before understanding, with the complete certainty of immediate physical knowledge, that he was very good at this, that the broom responded to him the way the shadows did, the way the castle did, as if it recognized something in his hands. He'd come back to Earth after those 3 minutes and not volunteered to demonstrate anything further, partly because Neville had fallen off his broom in the meantime and needed someone to talk to, and partly because a class full of first years watching him fly at full capacity was not a situation he wanted to create. He'd told Wood yes. He'd told Wood he could fly. They'd gone up together at 5 in the morning on a Thursday, just the two of them, and Harry had flown, and Wood had watched, and when they came down Wood had sat on a bench in the changing rooms for a long moment in silence before saying, in a voice stripped of its usual captain's performance, "What are you?" "A seeker," Harry had said, which was not the full answer but was the relevant one. I've been playing since I was 6. I've watched professional Quidditch since I could watch anything. I have never," he stopped. "The way you moved up there. The way the broom moved. It's like the broom is an extension of you rather than a thing you're riding." "It is," Harry said. "A bit." Wood had stared at him. Then the coach part of his brain had reasserted itself over the awestruck part, and he'd said, "You're our seeker. I'm not even going to make you try out. You're our seeker, and if you tell anyone I said that before a formal tryout I'll deny it." "Done," Harry had said. So he was the Gryffindor seeker, which meant he was not in the stands right now. He was on his broom, in the air, above the pitch, doing what he'd been doing for the past 40 minutes while the chasers ran their patterns and the beaters kept the bludgers busy and Wood patrolled the goal posts with the controlled desperation of a man for whom this mattered perhaps more than was strictly healthy. He was watching for the snitch, yes. But he was also watching the pitch the way he watched everything, with the full, layered attention that took in not just the obvious but everything adjacent to it. The positions of the Slytherin players. The patterns in how they communicated. The Slytherin seeker, a 5th year named Terence Higgs, who was fast and technically competent but who looked for the snitch with his eyes when he should have been feeling for it. And the stands. He watched the stands. Quirrell was in the stands. He'd known Quirrell would be there, the whole school was there, it was the first match of the season, but the specific location Quirrell had chosen was interesting. Not in the middle of the staff section but at the edge of it, slightly separated, with a line of sight to the pitch that was also a line of sight to Harry. He was murmuring something. His lips were moving with the particular constrained motion of a man performing an incantation he doesn't want observed. Harry felt it. The jinx, subtle, targeted, aimed at his broom. The same cold signature he'd identified in the classroom, now extended outward, reaching for the broom the way you'd reach for something you intended to destabilize without appearing to touch it. His broom shuddered once. Bucked. Harry tightened his grip and held steady, and looked at Quirrell in the stands, and the part of him that was old and dark and patient turned its attention toward the jinx the way you turn a light toward a shadow, not aggressively, not with force, but with the simple, complete authority of something that was there first. The jinx stopped. Not broke, stopped, as if it had encountered something it didn't know how to proceed past. The broom went still under him. Harry kept his eyes on Quirrell for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds Quirrell went very still in his seat, and then Harry looked away and turned back to the pitch and felt the snitch. Not saw, felt. The small pulse of it, golden and fast, tucked in the shadow of the left goalpost 30 feet below him, waiting to see if anyone was actually paying attention. Harry pointed his broom straight down and dropped. The speed was extraordinary, He'd been told, later, that the dive took approximately 4 seconds from start to finish, which was a distance of about 90 feet, which worked out to some speed that made the physics teacher in whatever part of Harry's brain tracked physics moderately impressed. He came out of it with his hand extended and the snitch beating furiously between his fingers and the crowd making the noise that crowds make when something has happened that they barely had time to see. Gryffindor won. Wood, somewhere behind him, made a sound that was part triumph and part relief and all passion. Harry landed and opened his hand and let the snitch hover in his palm, beating its wings in the captured way of something that knew it was caught and was working out what came next. He looked at it for a moment and then let it go, because catching things was satisfying but keeping them was a different proposition, and he'd done what he needed to do. In the stands, Quirrell was sitting very still with his hands flat on his knees and an expression that Harry, from 30 feet away, could read perfectly well. He wasn't looking at Harry. He was looking away, at nothing in particular, with the expression of someone who has just understood something and is not pleased with the understanding. Good, Harry thought. Let him understand. The dungeons on a November evening had the cold that didn't respond to warming charms, which Harry had noted several students casting as they came down the stairs and finding them less effective than expected. He hadn't cast one. The cold was fine. The cold was familiar. Potions had changed since the first lesson. Snape's approach to Harry had evolved over the 6 weeks of term with the specific quality of a man adjusting his tactics in real time, which Harry respected as a sign of intelligence. Snape had understood within the first 2 lessons that the approach of public humiliation was going to fail comprehensively and had pivoted, with minimal visible acknowledgement of the pivot, to something different. He engaged Harry now with a precision that was almost collegial, challenging him with questions that required actual thought, not to trip him, but because Snape was, when you removed the theater, a genuinely excellent academic who couldn't resist engaging with someone who could keep up. Today's lesson was strengthening solution, and Harry was at the bench with Hermione, which was always a productive arrangement. She moved through the process with methodical efficiency, calling each step as she went, and Harry worked adjacent to that rhythm, the two of them covering each other's gaps with the ease of people who'd done this enough times to have a functional shorthand. Lacewing flies first, Hermione said, then we need to let the base reduce by a third before adding the bicorn, Harry said. I know. He was watching the consistency of the solution in the cauldron, which was developing a faint shimmer that was slightly ahead of where it should be at this stage. Hermione. Look at the color. She looked. That's, oh. The heat's too high. How did you, the shimmer? It should come at the reduction stage, not before. She adjusted the flame. The shimmer subsided to the correct depth. She made a note in her margin with the characteristic neatness of someone for whom neatness was both habit and principle. How did you know that? She said, quietly. They'd both learned to talk quietly during potions, because Snape had the acoustic attentiveness of a man who had been eavesdropping on students for years and had become expert at it. I've been watching cauldrons go wrong since September, Harry said. You learn the signs. I've been watching too, Hermione said. I didn't see the shimmer. You're watching systematically, Harry said. I'm watching, differently. He paused, trying to find the honest version. I watch the way a thing is, not just what it's doing. The shimmer was wrong before it was visibly wrong. Hermione was quiet for a moment, stirring with measured precision. You do that with people too, she said. Not accusatory. Observational. Yes, Harry said. It's a little unnerving, she said, with the directness that Harry genuinely appreciated about her, the willingness to say the honest thing even when the honest thing was slightly uncomfortable. But also useful, so I've decided to accept it. Thank you, Harry said. Also, she said, in a slightly lower register, I've been thinking about Quirrell. Harry's attention sharpened. What about him? I've been reading, she said, which was always her opening move. About types of dark magic. Possession. There are 14 documented cases in the past 300 years. The common indicators are, she stopped herself. You already know this. Tell me what you found, Harry said, because the interesting thing was not always the conclusion but the path to it. The thing about possession, she said, is that the possessed person's magic gets suppressed. Not eliminated, suppressed. Like a signal being drowned out by a louder one. Quirrell's magic in class is quieter than it should be. I've been checking the spell outputs. His lumos last week produced 14% less light than the average for a qualified wizard. Harry looked at her. You measured his lumos output. I brought a photometric scale, she said, defensively. Hermione, Harry said. That's exceptional work. She blinked. Then looked at her cauldron with what Harry recognized as the expression of someone receiving a compliment that landed accurately. It's just data, she said. The point is, if something is suppressing his magic, and if that something is operating independently inside him, then it has its own magical signature. And I've been trying to find a way to measure that. What have you found? Harry said. The cold, she said quietly. On Thursdays. Have you noticed? The corridor outside the defense classroom on Thursdays is measurably colder than the rest of the week. Harry had noticed. He'd noticed Wednesday nights, he'd been right. Whatever happened Wednesday nights fed into Thursday, which was when the presence in Quirrell was most active. What do you think it's doing Wednesdays, he said. Trying to communicate, possibly, Hermione said. Or pushing Quirrell's plans forward. If something is operating inside a host, it would have difficulty, she looked up. Harry. What exactly is inside Quirrell? You know, don't you? It was not quite a question. They'd had this conversation on the edge several times, she'd been patient, had held to her promise not to push until he said more, but he could see in her face that the patience had reached its natural boundary of data. She had enough now. She needed the centerpiece. He looked at her steadily. Then at the dungeon around them, other students bent over their cauldrons, Snape at the front making notes, no one within a radius that made conversation dangerous. Voldemort, he said. She didn't flinch. She didn't make the sharp intake of breath that most people made at the name. She went very still, the way she went still when she was processing something serious, and stirred her potion 3 times counterclockwise and said, a fragment. Not the whole. A fragment, Harry confirmed. Greatly reduced. Looking for a way back. The stone, she said. Yes. Which is in the school. Which is in the school, Harry said. Which I've already added additional protections to. Which he can't reach. He paused. He's aware of me. We've registered each other. He's being cautious because he doesn't understand what I am. Hermione turned to look at him fully, cauldron be damned for a moment, with an expression that was a complex thing, the intellectual intensity that was always there, but underneath it something more personal. Something that was not quite fear but was in the territory of fear, except that it was not fear for herself but the specific, directed fear of someone who cares about a person and has just understood more fully what that person is dealing with. Harry, she said. Are you in danger? He thought about this genuinely. The honest assessment. No, he said. Not the way you mean. But the school is in danger, she said. Quirrell is going to make a move, Harry said. Before the year ends. When he does, I'll handle it. He looked at her. I wanted you to know. I should have told you sooner. I promised I would. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. You should have. And then, immediately, without losing the thread, what can I do? Keep doing what you're doing, he said. The data is useful. If you can track the pattern, Thursdays, the cold, anything else you measure, tell me. I will, she said, with the firmness of someone making a commitment they take seriously. They both looked at their cauldrons. The solution was a deep amber, correctly consistent, close to the reduction stage. Around them the dungeon continued its concentrated work. Ron needs to know, Hermione said. All of it. I know, Harry said. Tonight. Good. She picked up her stirring rod. Also, your solution is fractionally more amber than mine, which means your flame is slightly high. Harry adjusted his flame. Thank you, he said. You're welcome, she said, and went back to work. Ron took it well, which was to say that Ron took it the way he took most things, with an initial period of processing that looked like nothing in particular from the outside, followed by targeted questions, followed by a practical response. They were in a corner of the common room after dinner, the three of them at the table near the window that had become, without formal agreement, their table, the one that was slightly removed from the main flow of the room and that most other students had stopped trying to use, not because they'd been told not to but because there was something about the corner when Harry was in it that discouraged casual traffic. So Voldemort is inside Quirrell, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. On the back of his head. Yes. And he's been trying to get to the stone since the school year started. Since before that, Harry said. The Gringotts break-in was in July. Ron absorbed this. His chess pieces were on the board in front of him. He'd been in the middle of a game with himself when Harry had started talking, and they'd abandoned it, and now the knight was standing at the edge of the board looking at Harry with the small, carved attention of a thing that had heard everything and formed opinions. The thing about Gringotts, Ron said. You have a vault there. Yes. And the goblins, Hagrid told my dad, who told my mum, the goblins were, very formal, Harry said. Right, Ron said. He looked at his hands. Then at Harry. I keep having this thing where I know you're different, and I understand it sort of generally, and then something more specific comes along and I have to understand it more specifically, and each time it's, he made a gesture that covered the gamut. You know. I know, Harry said. It's fine, Ron said. I'm not going anywhere. I just want to be honest that it's an ongoing adjustment. I appreciate that, Harry said. The question, Hermione said, returning to the practical, is what we do. We've got Voldemort in the school, in Quirrell, looking for a stone that gives immortality, and Harry has added protections to the chamber but Quirrell is presumably going to keep trying, and eventually he'll make a move that requires us to do something about it. She had a piece of parchment in front of her with notes on it, because Hermione dealt with threats by systematizing them. What we need is to know when. Thursdays, Harry said. Something happens Wednesday nights. And the pattern's escalating, the cold is getting more pronounced each week. So we watch Quirrell on Wednesdays, Hermione said. I'll watch Quirrell, Harry said. We'll watch Quirrell, she said, with the particular firmness of someone who has already had this conversation internally and reached a conclusion. Harry looked at her. Then at Ron, who was nodding with the same quiet certainty. He looked at both of them for a moment, two people who knew, or knew enough, who had heard what he told them and had not pulled back, had not performed fear, had simply moved forward to the next practical question with him. He'd had a long time to be alone with what he was. He'd had 5 years of Privet Drive and a cupboard and shadows for company, and before that, before this life, something much longer and much colder. And sitting here now in the Gryffindor common room with the fire going and Hermione's parchment and Ron's chess pieces and the reliable warmth of two people who had decided, without drama, to be in his corner, he understood something about why the mirror had shown him this room. All right, he said. We watch together. Ron started resetting the chessboard. Hermione started reorganizing her notes by category. Outside the tower windows the November night was enormous and cold and full of stars, and somewhere below them in the dungeons, in a classroom smelling aggressively of garlic, something cold and diminished and very old was making its Wednesday plans. Harry picked up his Transfiguration essay and started writing, and let it. He found Quirrell at midnight on the following Wednesday. He wasn't looking for him specifically, he'd been walking the corridors because he sometimes walked the corridors at night, with the castle's quiet cooperation, because walking helped him think and the castle at night was a different thing from the castle in the day, older, quieter, more honest. The portrait slept. The ghosts drifted along their usual paths in the companionable way of people who have inhabited a space so long that their presence there is just a fact. Peeves, always Peeves 30-foot radius, observed from a distance. Quirrell was in the corridor outside the third-floor staircase. Not moving toward it, standing, which was more interesting. Just standing, with his back to Harry, looking at the door that led to the forbidden staircase, and his shoulders had the quality of a man who is wrestling with something and losing and knows it. Harry stopped. He considered the situation. Then he walked forward, and his footsteps were quiet but not silent. He wasn't sneaking, he was simply present, and he came to stand beside Quirrell in the corridor. Quirrell went rigid. His head turned, not the slow turn of someone becoming aware of a companion but the sharp, automatic turn of something inside him registering a presence it hadn't expected. The thing on the back of his head couldn't see Harry from that angle. But it felt him. They stood side by side in the corridor for a moment, looking at the door. Harry in his school robes. Quirrell in his turban and his garlic smell and his collected performances. Mr. Potter. Quirrell's voice was the stutter, the performance, but it was ragged at the edges. The performance was working harder tonight than usual. Professor, Harry said. Silence. The castle breathed around them. From somewhere far away, the sound of a ghost moving through a wall. Then the stutter dropped. Not entirely, not all the way to the other voice, but part way. The middle ground, the space between Quirrell and the thing wearing him. You've been watching, Quirrell said. Still Quirrell's voice, but thinner now, stripped of its amateur theater. Yes, Harry said. For long. Since the first day, Harry said. The classroom. Our hands were close. Something looked at me. He paused. Hello, by the way. To the other half of this conversation. The silence that followed had a texture to it. The temperature in the corridor dropped 3 degrees. Harry registered this with the mild interest of someone noting a weather change that doesn't affect them. Then, from the back of Quirrell's head, muffled by the turban, the voice of something that had once been enormous and was now the size of a thought, pressed into borrowed accommodation, came the sound of actual speech. Not loud. Not theatrical. Quiet, with the flatness of something beyond conventional expression. Potter. Yes, Harry said. What are you? Not who. What? Good question. Harry looked at the door to the forbidden staircase. I'm the thing you don't have a category for, he said. You've been alive a long time, comparatively. You've studied death and escaped it several times. You've touched the edges of very old magic. He paused. But you started from humanity and worked outward. I started from somewhere much further out. The cold in the corridor intensified. Then, deliberately, it receded, Voldemort pulling it back, controlling it, which was interesting. He was thinking rather than reacting. The stone, Voldemort said. Is not available to you, Harry said. Not aggressively. The way you state a fact that has no interesting alternatives. You can't hold it from me forever. I don't need to hold it from you forever, Harry said. Just long enough. Long enough for what? Long enough for you to understand, Harry said, that this path ends poorly. The stone, the body you get from it, it won't change what I am or what's waiting for you at the end of this. You know that, I think. You're intelligent enough to know it. A pause. The quality of the pause was not simple. There were several things in it, the cold calculation of a diminished mind that was still formidable, the particular frustration of a being that had spent decades building toward a goal and was now standing in front of an obstacle it couldn't classify, and underneath all of that, something else. Something more complex than either. Something that was almost, not grief, Voldemort didn't do grief, but the recognition of a distance. The distance between what Voldemort had spent his life reaching for and what was standing beside him in this corridor without effort. You were a child, Voldemort said, and there was something stripped in the voice now, not the performance of menace but the raw assessment of something very intelligent in a terrible position. On the night I came to Godric's Hollow. You were 15 months old. Yes, Harry said. And you were already, not entirely, Harry said. The curse woke more of it. But it was there before. He turned his head to look at the back of Quirrell's turban, at the wrapped shape of something that had once been the most feared name in magical Britain. You didn't kill my parents because of what I was, he said. You killed them because of a prophecy about something you thought you understood. You didn't understand it. No, Voldemort said, with what sounded, stripped of everything else, like the simplest possible honesty. I didn't. They stood in the corridor together, the boy who was something older than magic, and the diminished remnant of a man who had spent his entire life trying to escape the human condition, and the castle breathed around them and said nothing, because it was very old and very wise and understood that some conversations needed no commentary. You won't stop, Harry said. Not tonight. You'll go back, you'll plan, you'll try something else. I know that. He looked at the door to the staircase. But I want you to know something. When the time comes, not tonight, but when it comes, I'm not going to be afraid of you. And I'm not going to kill you. He turned to walk back the way he'd come. I'm going to do something you'll find considerably more uncomfortable. What? Voldemort said, and it was the most human the voice had sounded, not because it was warm, but because it was genuinely asking. The intellectual response of a mind that, stripped of its theater, was still formidably curious. I'm going to give you a choice, Harry said. He walked away down the corridor. His footsteps were quiet on the stone, and the shadows came with him as they always did, and the torches on the wall burned steadier as he passed them, and behind him in the cold air of the third-floor corridor, Quirrell stood very still for a very long time. He told Ron and Hermione at breakfast. Not everything, not verbatim, not the specific shape of what he and Voldemort had said to each other in the corridor, because some conversations were meant to be held lightly, handled carefully. But the fact of the meeting, the fact of the direct contact, the fact that Voldemort now understood the shape of the obstacle in front of him. You just, talk to him, Ron said. His spoon was suspended over his porridge and had been for 3 minutes. Yes, Harry said. To Voldemort. Yes. In the third-floor corridor. Yes. Ron put his spoon down. And he, listened, Harry said. He's intelligent. When you strip out the theater, the whole, Harry considered the word. The Dark Lord apparatus. The drama of it. He's very intelligent. He asked real questions. And you told him, Hermione was looking at him with that full, focused attention. You told him you'd give him a choice. Yes. What choice, she said. Harry, what choice are you planning to give Voldemort? Harry looked at his toast. He was quiet for a moment, not because he was uncertain but because this one was harder to put into words than most things, was deeper in the part of himself that operated in older registers than English. I'm going to give him the choice to understand what he actually is, Harry said. Not what he wants to be. Not what he's trying to become. What he actually is. He paused. Everyone deserves that. Even him. Ron and Hermione looked at each other. This was a look that had developed over the course of a term, the look they exchanged when Harry had said something that was simultaneously so Harry and so far outside the standard framework of how to think about Voldemort that they needed a moment. That's either the wisest thing I've ever heard, Hermione said slowly, or the most dangerous. Both, Harry said. Probably. Ron picked his spoon back up. Right, he said. Well. Eat your toast. Harry ate his toast. The great hall moved around them in its breakfast bustle, the post owls coming in through the high windows, the low warm noise of several hundred people beginning their day, the specific quality of Hogwarts mornings that Harry had come to think of as one of the best things about being here. The ordinary, ongoing, unrepeatable texture of it. He looked at the enchanted ceiling. A clear November morning, the light just beginning to find its full strength. Below it, somewhere in the school, Quirrell was teaching early morning students the theory of defensive charms and maintaining his stutter and his garlic in his performance. And somewhere inside that performance, something cold and formidable was thinking about a boy in a corridor who had offered it a choice it didn't understand yet. Harry drank his pumpkin juice and watched the ceiling in thought. Soon. Chapter 6, The Stone is Irrelevant. December arrived, and with it the particular quality of Hogwarts at the edge of winter, the way the lake went mirror flat in the mornings before the cold cracked it at the edges, the way the stone corridors breathed cold that no fire entirely defeated, the way the great hall smelled of pine and candle wax when the Christmas decorations went up and the enchanted ceiling shifted from November gray to the blue-black of early winter nights scattered with stars. Most students went home for Christmas. Harry didn't. He'd considered it, or rather, he'd been aware that the consideration existed as a formal possibility, which was different from actually wanting to go back to Privet Drive. The Dursleys had spent the past 5 years in a low-grade détente that Vernon maintained by not looking directly at Harry if he could help it, and Petunia maintained by occasionally, when she thought no one was watching, leaving better food outside the cupboard, now the bedroom door, in the specific way of someone who couldn't say they were sorry but could put a bowl of soup outside a door and close their eyes to the implications. Dudley had, somewhere in the past 2 years, begun the complicated adolescent process of reconsidering things he'd been told as a child, which was not yet kindness but was at least the absence of active hostility, which was progress. Harry had written them a brief letter. He was staying at school. He hoped they were well. He meant this, not warmly, but honestly. He did hope they were well. He had no particular interest in anyone's suffering. Ron stayed too. This was a surprise. The Weasley family was a family that celebrated Christmas with the collective energy of people who treated every holiday as an opportunity to demonstrate how completely they meant their relationships, but Ron had said, with the deliberate casualness of someone making a decision that was more considered than it looked, "Thought I'd stay. Keep you company. If that's all right." "It's very all right," Harry had said. Hermione went home to her parents in London, but she'd left Harry a list of 12 books she thought were relevant to what they'd been discussing and a letter explaining the photometric data she'd gathered through November, organized by date and cross-referenced with the cold temperature readings she'd taken outside Quirrell's classroom. The letter was 6 pages long and had footnotes. Harry read it 3 times and wrote back with 4 additional questions, and she'd answered by return owl within 24 hours, which suggested she'd been waiting. The castle at Christmas was extraordinary. Harry had expected it to be quieter, and it was, numerically, the headcount of students reduced to the small fraction who stayed, but quieter at Hogwarts wasn't the same as quieter elsewhere. The castle itself was more present without the noise of several hundred students filling its corridors. Harry could feel it more clearly, the way you hear a conversation better in an empty room. The old intelligence of the place moved through its stones with a warmth that was specifically Hogwarts, not his warmth, nothing like his warmth, but genuine and deep and good. He walked the whole castle on Christmas Eve morning. All of it, every floor, every corridor he'd found and several he hadn't visited before, the towers and the basements and the passages that the castle showed him without being asked because they were worth knowing. He went slowly and touched the walls and places, the way you put a hand on the shoulder of something that matters to you, and the stone was warm under his palm at every point. "I've been thinking about you for 5 years," he said, at one point, in a corridor on the 7th floor that he thought very few people had occasion to use. "Since I was 6. You felt enormous. From a distance." The corridor was very still. Then, slowly, the torches along the wall brightened, not dramatically, not in a way that would read as supernatural to someone who didn't know to look for it, just fractionally warmer and more golden. "Yes," Harry said. "I know. Me too." He went down for breakfast. Ron was already at the Gryffindor table when Harry arrived, surrounded by more food than 2 people could reasonably eat, which was apparently standard Hogwarts Christmas breakfast, and he'd pushed half of it toward Harry's seat and was working through a plate of eggs with the contentment of a boy who liked breakfast and found Christmas morning an excellent occasion for it. "Morning," Ron said. "Morning," Harry said, and sat, and poured himself pumpkin juice, and they ate in the comfortable silence that had become the baseline of their friendship, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled, that meant the same thing as conversation. Fred and George were 3 seats down, engaged in what appeared to be the systematic gifting of inappropriate presents to each other and rating the reactions. George had gotten Fred something that had turned his eyebrows temporarily orange and was regarding this with profound satisfaction. Fred had retaliated with a card that, when opened, played a sound that Harry recognized as a particularly embarrassing moment from Wood's last team meeting, and the look on George's face suggested he was both impressed and plotting. Percy sat further along reading what appeared to be a pamphlet about the Ministry's new cauldron thickness regulations with an expression of genuine engagement, which Harry found he respected, not the regulations, but the completeness with which Percy committed to the things he cared about. Ginny Weasley was at the far end of the table. She was a year behind them, Harry's year not quite her year, and she'd spent the first term operating in Harry's vicinity with the specific approach of someone who wanted very badly to say something and hadn't yet decided what. She had red hair and brown eyes and a look about her that was sharper than most people noticed, being distracted by the shyness, which Harry suspected was the point. She caught him looking and immediately looked at her plate. Harry looked back at his food without making anything of it, and in his peripheral vision she very slowly looked up again, and this time when their eyes met Harry nodded, and she blinked as if she hadn't expected that, and looked at her plate again, but differently this time. The plate of a person who has been acknowledged rather than the plate of a person who is hiding. After breakfast, Ron and Harry went to the grounds. The lake was doing the thing it did in deep cold, the edges iced over, the center still dark and moving, the boundary between frozen and liquid a precise line that Harry found aesthetically satisfying. They threw stones at the ice for a while, because this was the kind of thing you did on cold December mornings with a friend who didn't need you to explain yourself, and the ice made a satisfying sound when a stone skidded across it. "Can I ask you something?" Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. He had a flat stone in his hand and was considering the angle. "The choice," Ron said. "You told Voldemort you'd give him a choice. I've been thinking about it since you said it. What actually is the choice?" Harry skipped the stone. "For bounces. I told you. The choice to understand what he actually is." "Right, but what does that mean?" "Practically." Ron had his hands in his pockets and was watching the lake. "You're going to tell him? Show him?" "Both," Harry said. He picked up another stone, turned it over in his fingers. "Voldemort is what he is because he was afraid. Fear of death. Fear of his own humanity. Fear of being ordinary, which is the deepest fear, I think, for someone like him. He spent everything reaching toward power because the power was supposed to fix the fear." He paused. "It didn't." "Obviously," Ron said. "The choice is whether he wants to see that," Harry said. "Clearly. Without the apparatus of the Dark Lord, without the masks. Just what he actually is. A man who was afraid and made catastrophically wrong choices about it." He looked at the stone. "I'm not going to force that on him." "You can't. But I can show him what it looks like to be something vast and still be." He stopped. "Still be yourself," Ron said. Harry looked at him. Ron was watching the lake with the expression he wore when he was thinking hard and trying to make it look effortless, which was not his most convincing performance but was genuine. "Yeah," Harry said. "That. And you think he'll take it?" "No," Harry said. "Probably not. Not this year. Not the first time." He skipped the second stone. 5 bounces. "But I want to offer it. Because something I've been thinking about, since the corridor, since I talked to him, is that Voldemort is what happens when someone with real intelligence and real pain is given the wrong answer to both. He's a consequence. He's not a monster. He's a consequence." He looked at the lake. "Monsters are easier. You can just stop monsters. Consequences require more thought." Ron was quiet for a long moment. A bird went across the pale sky above them and the lake moved slowly in the middle where it hadn't frozen. "My mum thinks you should be frightened of him," Ron said. "Or, not you specifically, people in general. She doesn't say it like that, but it's what she means. He's the thing you're supposed to be afraid of. I know, Harry said. And you're just, not. No, Harry said. Not afraid of him. I don't think I'm capable of being afraid of something in the way most people are afraid. Not because nothing matters, things matter. You matter. Hermione matters. The school matters. He looked at Ron. Those things I'd fight for, properly, in a way that has, weight. Real weight. Voldemort is something I'm going to deal with because he's harming things that matter. He paused. But afraid of him specifically? No. Ron looked at him. Then, with the economy of feeling that was his characteristic mode when something was actually important to him, good, he said. Because I'd really like for you not to be afraid of the thing you're going to have to go deal with eventually. That's practical of you, Harry said. I'm a practical person, Ron said, and picked up a stone, and attempted to skip it, and it sank immediately, and he looked at it with an expression of profound betrayal. Harry almost laughed. He did laugh, a little, which surprised him, not the fact of it but the ease of it, the uncomplicated lightness of standing by a lake on a cold December morning and laughing at a stone that didn't skip. Ron grinned. They went back inside for hot chocolate. It started on a Tuesday evening in the second week of January, when the rest of the students had come back from Christmas and Hogwarts had returned to its full operational self and the term had settled back into its rhythms. Harry felt it at dinner. Not dramatically, he was eating, Ron was talking about a letter from his mum, Hermione was reading potions theory under the table in the way she'd taken to doing in the weeks since they'd had the full conversation, the way of someone with too many questions and not enough hours. Harry felt it the way he felt everything that mattered, not with his eyes or ears or any of the standard senses, but with the part of him that was older than senses, the deep registering of a shift in what was. Something in the school had changed. Some balance had tipped. He put his fork down. He looked at the staff table. Quirrell's seat was empty. Harry, Hermione said, without looking up from her book, because she had peripheral attention that was not quite his but was in the same family. Harry, what is it? Quirrell, Harry said. She looked up. Looked at the empty seat. Her eyes came back to him immediately. Now. I think so, he said. He was very still, reaching outward with the part of himself that connected to things, to the castle, to the old magic in its stones, to the piece of himself he'd placed in the underground chamber in October. That piece was, awake. The way a guard animal is awake when something approaches. Right, Ron said, quietly. He'd put his fork down too, and his face had the look Harry had come to associate with Ron in moments of genuine seriousness, no performance, just the direct, calm practicality of someone deciding what to do. What do we do? I go, Harry said. You too, don't finish that sentence, Hermione said, at exactly the same moment Ron said, absolutely not. Harry looked at them. The look he gave them was not you shouldn't come but something more complex, a genuine assessment of the situation, the weighing of what was down there against the value of what he had here, the calculus of someone who was capable of facing what was in the chamber alone but who was recognizing, possibly for the first time in his full, long, complicated life, that alone was not the same as best. The chess set, he said to Ron. The enchantment uses your kind of logic. I can win it but I can win it faster with you. I know, Ron said. He was already standing. And Snape, Harry said to Hermione. Someone needs to go to Snape. Tell him Quirrell's gone to the third floor. He'll know what it means. Hermione opened her mouth, and he could see the protest forming. She wanted to come, her entire face was the argument for coming, and then she closed it, and the discipline of a person who thinks strategically overrode the instinct. You need someone to cover the school end, she said. Yes, Harry said. You're the best person for it. Don't flatter me into compliance, she said, but she was already gathering her bag, already standing, already pivoting toward the door of the Great Hall. Go carefully. Always, Harry said, and meant it in the way that wasn't entirely the same as what she was hoping he meant, because careful for Harry was a different proposition than careful for most, but it was genuine. She went left. Harry and Ron went right. The third-floor corridor door was open. Not forced, opened, which meant Quirrell had gotten past the locks, which was consistent with a man who'd had months to study them. The trapdoor below was also open, which meant he'd dealt with Fluffy, and Harry stepped inside the first chamber and found the evidence, a small harp, still playing the last bars of something that was fading as they arrived, and Fluffy, all three heads, asleep on the floor. But not fully asleep. The rightmost head shifted when Harry came in, one eye opening to a slit, and what Harry saw in that half-open eye was not the aggression of last time but something more like complaint. As if Fluffy were aware of what had happened and objected to it on principle. "I know," Harry said. "I'm going after him. Go back to sleep." The head considered this for a moment, then closed its eye. Harry and Ron dropped through the trapdoor. The devil's snare was denser than Harry had found it in October. It had grown in the intervening months, which plants did, and it responded to Ron with less restraint than it had to Harry, and there was a brief, tense period during which Ron was more ensnared than strictly comfortable before Harry put one hand against the plant's tendrils and it released with the speed of something that had changed its mind abruptly. "The trick is not to struggle," Harry said. "I noticed," Ron said, extricating himself from the last tendril with great dignity. "Thank you." The key chamber was more complicated. The silver key that Quirrell had taken had left the flock in disarray, the enchanted birds looping in patterns that had lost their anchor, and Harry and Ron sorted through them on borrowed brooms with Ron calling formations and Harry executing them, and they got through in 3 minutes. The chess chamber, this was Ron's. Harry looked at the board. The pieces looked at them. The black side had moved, Quirrell had moved it, had gotten through, which meant he'd played and won, which meant he was on the other side and had had however long Harry had taken to get here. "How long?" Harry asked. Ron was already walking along the row of pieces, looking at the board with those chess commander eyes. "He moved these 3, he said, pointing without looking at Harry. "If he played this opening," his lips moved silently. 5 minutes. Maybe 6. He stepped back and looked at the full board. "All right. Sit." "Where?" "Bishop," Ron said. "Third from the left." Harry sat on the bishop, which shuffled under him with the feeling of something resigned to its role in events. The other pieces moved. Ron walked to the king's knight position and looked at the board from there, and something happened in his face that was the equivalent of the moment when a picture resolves out of a pattern, everything arriving at once. "Play it through," he said, to himself, to the board, to the pieces. He looked at the White Queen, who looked back with the attention of a piece that was ready. "Right. Let's go." What followed was 11 moves that Harry watched with the full focus of someone who understood strategy and was watching someone else execute it at a level that was, genuinely, exceptional. Ron didn't play like a boy playing a charmed chess set. He played like a man who had spent his whole childhood being taught the game by pieces that had opinions and had learned to think alongside those opinions rather than over them. He played the board as if it were a conversation rather than a contest, and the pieces responded to that, moved with him rather than just for him. 3 minutes in, Quirrell's timeline said they were approximately 3 minutes behind him. Harry looked at the board and the exits and did arithmetic. "Ron," he said. "I need to go." 2 more moves, Ron said, without looking at him. His eyes were tracking 3 positions simultaneously. The timing, 2 more moves, Ron said, and there was a quality in his voice that Harry recognized from the pitch, from watching Wood, the complete, focused calm of someone in the right part of their mind. He trusted it. 2 moves. Then Ron looked up, and the path to the far door was clear, and he said, "Go." Harry went. He was through the door in a second, and then the next chamber, the troll, already neutralized, he stepped past it, and then the potions, and he was going faster now, moving with the easy speed of something that didn't need to be careful about its own footing, and through the final door. The mirror of Eriste was where it had been. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He'd removed the turban, which was practical, the back of his head needed to see, and whatever Voldemort's face was, it was turned toward the mirror with the fixed attention of something that had been looking for something for a very long time. The enchanted flames around the room burned blue and purple and green, and the mirror reflected back something that only the person standing in front of it could see, and Quirrell was reaching toward it with both hands, and the reaching was not working. Harry's protection was doing what he'd put it there to do, not blocking Quirrell physically, but making the mirror's cooperation unavailable, the way you make a room unavailable by being in it first. The mirror showed Quirrell what he wanted, but what he wanted stayed in the mirror, stayed reflection, stayed unreachable. Harry walked in. He walked to the center of the chamber, and he didn't rush or announce himself, he simply arrived, and the arrival was itself a statement. Quirrell turned. The face on the back of his head turned too. Voldemort's face, pressed into the back of Quirrell's skull like a bas-relief, pale and red-eyed and carrying what was left of a once immense power, looked at Harry, and Harry looked back. The chamber was very quiet. The flames burned their unnatural colors and the mirror stood in its elaborate frame and the underground air was cold and deep. "Potter," Quirrell said, and it was fully Voldemort's voice now, no stutter, no performance, the flat precise voice Harry had heard in the third-floor corridor at midnight. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." "You left dinner early," Harry said. "I noticed." He looked around the chamber. "The mirror's protection is mine. You know that." "I know," Voldemort said. "I've been standing here for 8 minutes working out how to remove it and I can't." Something in the voice, not anger, not quite. The controlled irritation of an excellent mind encountering a problem it cannot solve. "What did you put here?" "A piece of myself," Harry said. "Not a spell. Not a ward. Just, me. And the mirror responds to you." "The mirror responds to what I want," Harry said. He walked to stand beside Quirrell and looked at the mirror. The mirror showed him the common room again, Ron and Hermione, the fire, the warm ordinariness of it. It showed him exactly what it always showed him. "I don't want the stone," he said. "And the mirror knows it. So the stone stays in the mirror and won't come out." He turned to look at Quirrell, at both faces, the front and the back. "You can't make me want it. And you can't imitate wanting it without wanting it." Quirrell was trembling. Not from cold, from the conflict of two things in one body, one trying to move forward and one being held back. The conflict expressed itself in the trembling the way buildings express pressure at their stress points. "We're past the part," Voldemort said, "where I try to reason with you." "I know," Harry said. "You're going to try to take it by force. Use Quirrell to attack me." He said this without drama. "You know what happens when Quirrell touches me." A pause. The pale red eyes were very still. "I don't know exactly," Voldemort said. "That's what you're counting on." "No," Harry said. "What I'm counting on is that you do know, mostly. That you felt it in the classroom, what I am, at the edges. And that your intelligence, which is genuine, is telling you that direct contact is not in your interest." He looked at the mirror. "But you're going to try anyway. Because you've run out of options and desperation is the last argument." "Don't," Quirrell said suddenly, and it was Quirrell's own voice, cracked and raw, the man underneath, surfacing for a moment, coming up through the cold press of something much heavier. "Don't, he doesn't know," and then Voldemort's presence pushed him down again, and what came back was the controlled flatness. "He knows," Voldemort said. "More than I've ever encountered." The chamber held the sound of this, the bare acknowledgement from something that had spent decades being unable to acknowledge anything as its superior. "Tell me what you are." "I already told you," Harry said. "In the corridor." "You gave me a category," Voldemort said. "I want the specific." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about whether to give it, not because he was afraid of giving it, but because the question of what it meant to say it plainly was interesting in itself. To name something was to give it a shape it didn't necessarily have naturally. But this conversation deserved honesty, so. I'm what existed before magic had rules, he said. Before the structure. Before wands and cores and categories of dark and light. Magic came from something, the way rivers come from rain that came from oceans. I'm the part that's still ocean. Still moving, still dark, still without shore. He paused. In human terms, I'm the reborn consciousness of something that predates your entire frame of reference. I'm not good or evil in your definitions. I'm just, what was before those definitions. The red eyes looked at him. And you're in a child's body, Voldemort said, and there was something in it that was not mockery but was the adjacent thing, the note of a brilliant mind finding the absurdity, not without a kind of dark appreciation. Yes, Harry said. The body suits me. I'm not only the old thing, I'm also genuinely Harry Potter. That's not a mask. It's not a vessel I'm occupying. He looked at his hands, small, 11-year-old hands with ink on 2 of the fingers from his homework. I'm both things completely. That's not a contradiction where I'm from. Voldemort was very still. The silence went on longer than the previous silences, longer than the corridor at midnight, longer than the classroom, longer than any previous exchange. Harry let it go on. He'd offered it and would wait. Then Quirrell moved. Not Voldemort's decision, Harry thought, or not entirely. The desperation Voldemort had named was real, and desperation eventually overrides intelligence, and Quirrell's hands came forward and reached for Harry's throat with the particular speed of something acting out of crisis rather than calculation. Harry stood still. He didn't step back. He didn't block. He let Quirrell's hands reach him. The contact happened, fingers on Harry's neck, and in the instant of contact, the thing that Harry was moved through the point of connection the way water moves through an opening, completely, immediately, without violence. Not an attack. Not a curse. Not a defense. Just the simple, total presence of something ancient in contact with something much, much newer. Quirrell cried out. The sound he made was not pain in the simple sense, it was the sound of a man experiencing a cold so profound it went past cold and became something else, the sound of someone standing at the edge of the deepest water and understanding the depth of it for the first time. He fell back. Harry stepped back too, and looked at his own hands, and the shadows in the chamber had gathered close around him, not threateningly, just, present, the way they were always present, like water around something that belonged in water. Quirrell was on the ground. The conflict in him had intensified, 2 things fighting for the same body with the urgency of crisis, and one of them was losing, but the one that was losing was Quirrell himself, and Harry watched and understood what was happening. Understood what was coming. He crouched down. He looked at Quirrell's face, the front face, the real face, the man who had once been a nervous academic who had made a catastrophic mistake in an Albanian forest and had never been entirely himself again. The man's eyes were unfocused, moving between something present and something far away. Quirrell, Harry said quietly. The eyes tried to focus. Found him. It's going to be over soon, Harry said. I'm sorry it happened to you. Something in the man's face shifted. Not release, not peace, which would have been too convenient and too dishonest. But recognition. The recognition of being seen, properly, in the last moment of being seeable. Quirrell started, and then something pressed down on him, and then it stopped pressing, because the thing doing the pressing was no longer in a position to press, and what left Quirrell was not dramatic, a cold that rose for a moment, severe and sharp, and then dispersed, like mist in morning light, thinning and going and gone. Not destroyed. Harry knew that. Not ended. Something like Voldemort didn't end cleanly the first time, not when there were anchors still in the world. But displaced, pulled from its host and dispersed into the atmosphere, diminished further, pushed back to the starting configuration of a thing that had to begin again from nothing. Quirrell was still on the ground. His breathing was shallow and his face was the face of someone who has been somewhere very dark for a very long time and has just been let out, and the letting out was its own kind of difficult. Harry put one hand on his shoulder. The shadows pooled around them both, gentle, the way they pooled around Harry in the cupboard on the nights when they were just keeping company. "Stay still," Harry said. "Someone's coming." He'd heard footsteps on the stairs, the light, quick footsteps of someone who moved fast when the situation required it. Then the door opened and Dumbledore came in, not hurrying, but present with the full purposeful presence of a man who has moved quickly to get here and is now here completely. He took in the scene with those half-moon eyes. Quirrell on the ground. Harry crouched beside him. The mirror standing intact in its frame, the stone still safely within it. The chamber undamaged. No battle, no scorch marks, no destruction, none of the physical evidence of a magical confrontation. His eyes came to Harry. The familiar expression moved through them, the calibration, the wonder, the thing that would always be present now whenever he looked at Harry, the residue of a hallway floor in Privet Drive and a conversation over tea. "He's gone," Harry said. "Voldemort, from Quirrell. Not destroyed, dispersed. Quirrell needs a healer. He's been hosting something that sighs for, I don't know how long, but it's done damage." Dumbledore crossed the room with the quiet speed of a man who has been exceptional at what he does for a very long time. He crouched on the other side of Quirrell and did a rapid, practiced assessment, hands moving in the patterns of diagnostic magic, face focused. He looked up at Harry. "You're not hurt?" "No," Harry said. "The stone is in the mirror. The protection held. You can move it tomorrow, or the next day, whenever you've made the arrangements." He stood up. "He's going to come back eventually. Voldemort. Not this year, not in this form. But eventually." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "You know that?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I know that." "Then we'll deal with it then," Harry said. "But not tonight." He looked at Quirrell, whose eyes had closed now, whose breathing had steadied into something more survivable. "He needs the hospital wing." Dumbledore stood and looked at Harry across the room, across the mirror and the unnatural flames and the underground stone of the chamber. He looked at an 11-year-old boy in his school robes with ink on his fingers, standing in the middle of a situation that he had walked into, addressed, and walked back from with the quiet efficiency of someone completing a task rather than surviving an ordeal. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Yes. I want you to know that when I look at you, whatever questions I have, whatever things I don't understand, and there are many," he paused. "I'm very glad you're here. In this school. In this world." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the mirror, which showed him, still, reliably, consistently, the common room. Ron. Hermione. The fire. "Thank you," he said. And meant it the full way, the human way, the way that was genuinely Harry and not ancient at all. He turned and walked back through the chambers. The troll was still unconscious. The chessboard was reset, the pieces standing in their starting positions, Ron's passage through them noted in the specific way that played through magic notes things, the queen standing slightly proud of her square, as if in memory of her role. Ron was on the other side of the door. He was sitting against the wall with his knees up, and he looked up when Harry came through with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a particular person to come back through a particular door and was not going to pretend the waiting had been comfortable. "Well," he said. "Done," Harry said. "Voldemort? Gone for now. Quirrell's in bad shape but he'll live." Ron exhaled. It was the exhale of someone who had been holding their breath in ways that went beyond the literal. Then he got to his feet and looked at Harry with those steady blue eyes that Harry had come to understand were the core of Ron Weasley, not the humor, not the self-deprecation, not the easy manner, but this, the steady looking, the not flinching, the "I'm going to be here whether this is comfortable or not." "Next time," Ron said, "I'm not waiting on this side of the door." "I know," Harry said. "I won't ask you to." "Good." Ron straightened his robes. "Hermione's going to want every detail." "I know." She's going to be annoyed that she wasn't here. Yes. Are you all right? Harry thought about this. About Quirrell on the ground, and the cold dispersal of something that had once been Tom Riddle, and the mirror showing the common room, and Dumbledore's face when he'd looked at Harry across the chamber. About 11 years old and ink on his fingers and a friend waiting on the other side of a door. Yes, he said. Genuinely, completely, without qualification. I'm all right. Ron nodded. Then let's go. It's late and I'm freezing and Hermione's probably worn a path in the common room floor. They walked back up through the trapdoor, past Fluffy who was deeply and genuinely asleep now, the music having done its work and the emergency being, in Fluffy's assessment, concluded. Harry paused to pat the nearest head, the enormous, furred, warm reality of it, and the head twitched in sleep and resettled. Up the stairs. Third floor. Second. First. Marble staircase. Moving staircases, cooperating. The castle warm around them, the torches bright, the stone walls close and present, old and breathing. Harry put his hand on the wall at one point, just for a second, as they walked. The stone was warm. I know, the castle said, in the way it always said things, not in words, not in language, in the texture of the warmth and the quality of the light. I know. The common room was warm and firelit and Hermione was standing in the middle of it in her dressing gown with her arms crossed and the expression of a person who has been waiting for 2 hours and has been extremely productive in her frustration, having apparently reorganized her entire potions notes system while waiting. She looked at them when they came in. She looked at Harry. She looked at Ron. She looked at Harry again. Well? She said, which was exactly what Ron had said, and Harry thought this was one of the things about having friends who were themselves, the convergence of the same question from two very different people. Done, Harry said. She unfolded her arms. She looked at him for a moment longer with those sharp brown eyes. Then she said, sit down. Both of you. I'm going to get the hot chocolate ingredients from the kitchen and you're going to tell me everything and I mean everything in order and I want times where you have them. Hermione, Ron said, it's past midnight. Then we'd better start, she said, and went to the portrait hole. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. They sat down by the fire, which was still going. The castle kept the fires going in the common rooms through the night, had done since always, a fact Harry had always found quietly generous. Hermione came back with a tray and 3 cups and steam rising from them and settled into the chair with the focused readiness of a person who has identified a story she intends to understand completely. Start from dinner, she said. When you felt it. Start there. Harry started there. He told them all of it, completely, the way he'd promised he would, no omissions, no strategic withholding, the full account from the feeling at dinner to the moment of contact to the dispersal to Dumbledore's face in the chamber. He told them what Voldemort had said, and what he'd said back, and the specific quality of the exchange in the chamber, the bare intelligence of a diminished mind still asking real questions, and the answer he'd given, and what the mirror had shown him. When he got to the mirror, Hermione put her cup down. It showed you the common room, she said. Every time, Harry said. She looked at the fire. Something was moving in her face that was more complex than the analytical engagement, something that had to do with the human weight of what the mirror showed and what that meant. That's what you want most, she said. This. Yes, Harry said. The fire crackled. Ron was looking at his hot chocolate with the thoughtful expression of someone processing several things simultaneously. Then we should make sure, Hermione said, carefully, with the precision of someone choosing a word and meaning it exactly, that this keeps being worth wanting. Harry looked at her. Then at Ron, who had looked up from his cup with the same steady blue directness. I'd like that very much, Harry said. Done, Ron said, with the same word, the same tone he'd used all evening, simple, complete, absolutely final. Outside the tower windows, the December night was very dark and very clear and full of stars. The Scottish winter pressed against the glass and the fire pressed back, and the room held its warm ground between them, ordinary and specific and irreplaceable. Harry looked at the fire. He thought about the thing he'd dispersed tonight, the cold fragment of a brilliant and broken mind sent tumbling back into the dark. He thought about next year, and the year after, and the shape of what was coming, the anchors still in the world, the long work of it, the real confrontation that was somewhere ahead. He thought about Dumbledore upstairs with Quirrell and the mirror and the stone, making arrangements, doing the work of the world. He thought about Draco Malfoy saying "I'm not my father" to the cold October air above a Quidditch pitch. He thought about a cupboard under stairs, and shadows that breathed, and a drawing of a sun scratched into dark wood. He thought about being 6 years old and looking at an old man who'd collapsed in his hallway and feeling, not triumph, not alarm, something more like the beginning of understanding. That this was the world. That it needed things from him, and he had things to give, and the giving was going to be complicated and long and occasionally involve underground chambers, but that underneath all of it there was this, a warm room, people who stayed, a fire that held its ground against the dark. He was 11 years old. He was older than that by a measure that had no name in any language currently spoken. He was Harry Potter, who had grown up in a cupboard and read everything he could find and talked to shadows and waited, for 5 years, for a castle on a hill to be ready for him. He was all of these things, simultaneously, without contradiction. The fire burned. The stars turned. The castle breathed its long, patient breath around them. Harry picked up his hot chocolate and drank it, and it was warm, and the night was long, and there was more to come, there was always more to come, but tonight, in this room, everything that needed to be was exactly as it should be. That was enough. For tonight, that was completely enough.